Wild things can't be tamed. They'll always turn on you in the end. That's what the villagers of Pinewood Hollow whispered to young Hazel Wise every time she ventured near the forest edge with scraps of food hidden in her pockets. That's what the hunters told her father when they found wolf tracks near their cottage. That's what her stepmother hissed through clenched teeth whenever Hazel returned home with mud on her dress and pine needles in her hair. But Hazel would learn that some wild things remember kindness. And some debts are paid in ways that shatter everything you thought you knew about the world. Because the creature she fed in secret, the wounded, starving wolf with eyes like molten gold, and a gash across his ribs that should have killed him, wasn't just any animal. He was royalty. He was power incarnate. He was the Alpha King of the northern packs, cursed into a form that made him vulnerable, trapped in a body that made him prey. And Hazel? She was just a 10-year-old girl with too much heart and not enough sense, according to everyone who mattered. The forgotten daughter, the unwanted burden, the child whose mother died bringing her into the world, leaving her father bitter and her stepmother cruel. She saved a king without knowing it, and years later, when she needed saving herself, he would remember. But debts between humans and wolves are never simple, and the price of mercy, well, that's a cost Hazel couldn't begin to imagine as she knelt in the snow that first winter evening, offering a wounded predator the only thing she had, half a stale loaf of bread, and a heart too stubborn to learn fear. The forest remembers, the wolves remember, and when Hazel Wise turned 18 and her world crumbled into ash and betrayal, she would learn that wild things keep their promises, even if those promises are written in blood and moonlight. Chapter 1. The Girl Who Fed Wolves. The bread was 3 days old, hard as river stones, and smelled faintly of the mold Hazel had carefully cut away that morning. She clutched it inside her threadbare coat as she trudged through the snow toward the forest edge, her breath forming small clouds in the bitter January air. Hazel Wise, you get back here this instant. Her stepmother's voice cut through the twilight like a blade. Hazel didn't turn around. She'd learned years ago that acknowledging Corinne Roach's commands only made things worse. Better to pretend she hadn't heard, to disappear into the tree line before Corinne could storm out of the cottage and drag her back by her hair. It had happened before. Hazel was 10 years old, small for her age, with dark hair that never stayed braided and eyes the color of winter moss. She wore her dead mother's coat 2 sizes too big, patched at the elbows, smelling of wood smoke and old lavender. It was the only thing of her mother's that Corinne hadn't sold or burned. The forest welcomed her like an old friend. The moment she passed the first line of pines, the world softened. Snow fell in lazy spirals through the branches. Somewhere deeper in the woods, an owl called. Hazel's shoulders relaxed. Here, she wasn't the unwanted stepdaughter. Here, she wasn't the girl whose birth had killed her mother, the living reminder of her father's grief. Here she was just Hazel, and the trees didn't judge her for existing. She followed the same path she'd taken every evening for the past 3 weeks, a narrow deer trail that wound between ancient oaks and led to a small clearing where granite boulders formed a natural shelter. The snow was deeper here, untouched except for her own small footprints, and the drag marks she'd noticed that first day. Blood on snow. A trail of it, leading into the rocks. That's how she'd found him. The wolf. Hazel approached the boulder shelter slowly, making soft clicking sounds with her tongue. Not the sounds the hunters used, those were sharp, aggressive, designed to flush prey. These were gentler. The kind of sounds her mother had made to coax rabbits from their burrows. Or so her father had told her once, back when he still talked about her mother without his face going hard and cold. "Hello," Hazel whispered. "It's me again. I brought food." For a long moment, nothing. The forest held its breath. Then, from the shadows between the boulders, a pair of eyes appeared. Gold. Not yellow like a dog's eyes, but true gold, like the chalice Father Damien used during Sunday service in the village church. They caught the last rays of sunlight filtering through the trees and threw it back, luminous and impossibly aware. The wolf emerged slowly, limping on his left foreleg. He was massive, bigger than any wolf Hazel had ever seen in the hunters' carts when they brought their kills to town. His fur was thick and dark, charcoal gray with black tips, matted with old blood along his ribs where the wound was. The gash had been deep. Hazel could see it even now, partly healed but still angry and red beneath the fur. Someone had tried to kill him. And nearly succeeded. "I know you're hurting," Hazel said softly, kneeling in the snow. She was careful to keep her movements small, non-threatening. I brought bread again. I'm sorry it's not meat. Corinne watches the kitchen like a hawk. And father sold all the chickens last week. The wolf watched her with those unsettling golden eyes. There was something in his gaze that made Hazel's skin prickle, not fear. Exactly, but a strange awareness. Like being looked at by something that understood far more than it should. Animals weren't supposed to look at you like that. Like they were thinking, calculating, remembering. Hazel broke the bread into pieces, setting them on a flat stone near the edge of the clearing. She knew better than to approach too closely. For 3 weeks now, she'd followed the same ritual: bring food, leave it within reach, back away slowly. The wolf would wait until she'd retreated 10 paces before limping forward to take what she'd offered. He never growled, never showed teeth. Just watched her with those ancient golden eyes, ate the food she brought, and disappeared back into the shadows. But today was different. Today, as Hazel set down the last piece of bread and started to back away, the wolf moved forward. Not to the food, toward her. Hazel's heart kicked in her chest. She froze, every instinct screaming at her to run. The wolf was huge up close, his head level with her chest, even on all fours. His teeth, she could see them now, white and sharp, could crush her skull with a single bite. "It's okay," she heard herself whisper, though her voice shook. "I'm not going to hurt you. I promise." The wolf stopped 3 feet away. For a long, breathless moment, they stared at each other, girl and predator, separated by snow and instinct, and the fundamental wrongness of this entire situation. Then the wolf lowered his head and took 2 more careful steps forward. Hazel's hands trembled. She wanted to run. Every rational part of her brain screamed that she was about to die, that this was how it ended. Killed by the thing she'd tried to help. But she didn't move. The wolf's nose touched her outstretched hand, cold, wet, surprisingly gentle. He sniffed her palm, her wrist, her ragged coat sleeve. Then he did something that stole the breath from Hazel's lungs. He pressed his massive head against her hand, leaning into her touch like a dog seeking comfort. Hazel's fingers moved almost of their own accord, threading through the thick fur at the wolf's neck. He was warm beneath all that matted coat, solid and real and alive. She could feel his heartbeat, strong and steady. Could feel the slight tremor in his muscles, pain from the wound. Or perhaps something else. "You're not going to hurt me," Hazel whispered, wonder creeping into her voice. "Are you?" The wolf pulled back, those golden eyes fixing on hers. And for just a moment, a single, impossible moment, Hazel could have sworn she saw something human looking back at her, something aware and grateful and utterly, terrifyingly intelligent. Then the moment passed. The wolf turned, limped back to the boulder shelter, and picked up 1 piece of bread in his jaws. He carried it into the shadows, and Hazel heard the soft sounds of him eating. She stayed kneeling in the snow, her hand still tingling where his fur had touched her skin, her mind spinning with questions she couldn't answer. What kind of wolf behaved like this? What kind of animal looked at you like it understood every word you said, like it was memorizing your face, like it was making some kind of decision about you? Hazel didn't know. But as she finally stood and began the walk back to the cottage, she felt something shift inside her chest, a strange, fierce protectiveness that she'd never felt before. This wolf, whatever he was, trusted her. Had chosen to trust her, despite his injury, despite his obvious strength. And Hazel Wise, the unwanted girl, the burden, the mistake, she would not betray that trust, even if it cost her everything. Behind her, hidden in the shadows of the boulder shelter, the wolf watched her go. The bread sat forgotten at his paws. His eyes tracked her small form until she disappeared into the trees. And only then did he close them, a low whine escaping his throat. The curse burned in his veins like poison. The wound in his side throbbed with every breath, not from the blade that had caused it, but from the magic that kept him trapped in this form. 4 months. 4 months since the witch had smiled and spoken her punishment, since his own arrogance had cost him everything. "You'll learn what it means to be powerless," she'd said. "You'll learn what it means to be prey." And he had. Gods, he had. But he'd also learned something else. Something the witch hadn't intended. He'd learned that kindness existed. That a small human child with nothing to her name would share what little she had with a monster she should have feared. That mercy wasn't weakness, it was the rarest form of strength. The Alphaking opened his golden eyes and stared at the piece of bread the girl had left him. Hazel. He'd heard her stepmother call that name across the snow. Hazel Wise. He would remember it. When the curse finally broke, if it broke, he would remember. And he would repay this debt. That was a promise written in blood and moonlight, bound by laws older than human memory. The girl had saved him, protected him, fed him when he was weak, and wolves never forgot. Chapter 2. The Bitter Roots of Home. Hazel returned to the cottage as the last light bled from the sky, painting the snow in shades of purple and gray. Smoke curled from the chimney, a thin, grudging ribbon that spoke of a fire kept deliberately small. Her father was careful with firewood now, careful with everything, ever since he'd remarried and Corinne had taken over the household accounts. The cottage had been cheerful once, or so Hazel imagined, before her mother died, before grief had stripped the paint from the shutters and the warmth from the rooms. Now it hunched at the edge of Pinewood Hollow like something ashamed of itself, its thatched roof sagging, its windows dark except for the single candle Corinne allowed in the main room after sunset. Hazel paused at the door, steeling herself. Through the warped wood, she could hear voices, her father's low rumble and Corinne's sharp replies. They were arguing. Again, throwing good money after bad, Clint. The girl eats like a horse and contributes nothing. She's 10 years old, Corinne. What do you expect her to contribute? At 10, I was already working in my father's shop, learning a trade. What does Hazel do? Wanders in the forest like a wild thing, tracking mud through my clean floors, wasting food. My floors, Clint Marquez said quietly. My cottage. My daughter. The silence that followed was worse than the arguing. Hazel knew that silence. It was the sound of her father's guilt, heavy and suffocating, filling every corner of the room. Guilt for remarrying, guilt for bringing Corinne into their home, guilt for failing to protect Hazel from the woman who was supposed to be her new mother, but most of all, guilt for looking at his daughter and seeing only the wife he'd lost. Hazel pushed open the door. The cottage's main room was small and sparse, a hearth, a rough-hewn table, 2 chairs, and a narrow ladder leading to the loft where Hazel slept. Corinne stood by the fire, her arms crossed over her chest, her face pinched with perpetual disapproval. She was a handsome woman, tall and severe, with blonde hair pulled back so tightly it seemed to stretch her features. She'd been widowed young, childless, and had married Clint Marquez for security, not love. She made sure everyone knew it. Clint sat at the table, his shoulders hunched, staring into a cup of something that might have been tea but smelled bitter. He was a logger, broad-shouldered and strong, with hands scarred from years of working the forest. But tonight, he looked small, diminished. He didn't look up when Hazel entered. "Where have you been?" Corinne's voice could have cut glass. "Walking," Hazel said, shrugging off her too large coat and hanging it by the door. She kept her voice neutral, empty of challenge. It was safer that way. Walking. In the forest, after dark. Do you have any idea how many times I called for you? I'm sorry. Sorry. Corinne laughed, sharp and humorless. Clint, your daughter is sorry. Isn't that precious? Corinne, Clint started, but his wife cut him off with a look. No, I've held my tongue long enough. This child runs wild, disobeys every instruction, and acts as though she owns this household. Well, she doesn't. I do. And I'm done pretending this arrangement works. Hazel's stomach dropped. She'd heard this tone before. The tone that preceded ultimatums, punishments, threats to send Hazel away to distant relatives who didn't exist. What are you saying? Clint asked, his voice carefully controlled. Corinne turned to face him fully, her expression hardening. I'm saying that come spring, we send her to the workhouse in Millbrook. She's old enough. They'll take her as an apprentice, teach her something useful. God knows she's learning nothing here. The workhouse. Hazel had heard stories about that place. Children worked 16 hours a day in the textile mills, slept in crowded dormitories, and emerged years later with ruined lungs and broken spirits. If they emerged at all, no. Clint's voice was quiet, but it carried weight. Absolutely not. Then what do you suggest? Corinne demanded. We can barely feed ourselves, Clint. The logging contracts have dried up, the winter's been harsh, and your daughter, your precious reminder of a dead woman, eats food we can't afford and contributes nothing. Nothing. She's a child. She's a burden. The words hung in the air like a curse. Hazel stood frozen by the door, her coat dripping melted snow onto the floor, her heart hammering against her ribs. She wanted to speak, to defend herself, to scream that she didn't ask to be born, didn't ask for her mother to die, didn't ask for any of this. But the words stuck in her throat. Because part of her, the small, dark part she never acknowledged, wondered if Corinne was right. Clint stood slowly, his chair scraping against the floor. For a moment, Hazel thought he might actually defend her, might tell Corinne that she was wrong, that Hazel belonged here, that family didn't abandon each other. Instead, he said, "We'll discuss this later." Not in front of her. And he walked out. Just walked right past Hazel without meeting her eyes, grabbed his coat from its peg, and disappeared into the night, probably heading to the tavern in the village center, where he could drink away his guilt in peace. Hazel and Corinne stared at each other across the small room. "Go to bed," Corinne said finally, her voice flat. "And don't come crying to me when your father agrees with me. Because he will. He always does." In the end, Hazel climbed the ladder to the loft without a word. Her sleeping space was barely large enough to lie down in a straw mattress, a single threadbare blanket, and a small wooden box containing her few possessions. A tarnished locket with her mother's picture, a handful of smooth river stones, and a book of fairy tales her father had given her 3 birthdays ago. Back when he still remembered such things. She curled up on the mattress, pulling the blanket over her head, and tried not to cry. Crying was weakness. Crying gave Corinne satisfaction. But alone in the darkness, with the sound of Corinne moving around below, and the memory of her father's retreating back burned into her mind, Hazel let the tears come. She was a burden, unwanted, unloved. The workhouse waited. Spring waited. And with it, the end of the only life she'd ever known. The days that followed fell into a grim pattern. Corinne grew colder, more cutting. Clint grew more absent, taking extra logging contracts that kept him away from dawn until long after dark. And Hazel disappeared into the forest whenever she could, seeking refuge in the only place that didn't make her feel like a mistake. The wolf was always there. Every evening, she brought him food scraps she managed to hide from Corinne's watchful eyes. Stale bread, vegetable peelings, once a precious chicken bone she'd rescued from the soup pot. The wolf accepted everything with that same unsettling intelligence in his golden eyes, that same careful gentleness when he took food from her hands. Yes, from her hands now. After that first touch, something had shifted between them. The wolf no longer waited for her to retreat. Instead, he would emerge from the boulder shelter the moment she arrived, limping less now as his wound slowly healed, and approach her directly. Hazel had started talking to him, telling him things she couldn't tell anyone else. "Corinne wants to send me away," she whispered one evening, kneeling in the snow while the wolf's warm breath ghosted across her face. Her fingers worked through the tangles in his thick fur, carefully avoiding the healing wound. "To a workhouse. Father won't stop her. He never stops her." The wolf made a low sound in his throat, not quite a growl, but something darker, his eyes fixed on hers with an intensity that should have been frightening. "I know it sounds silly," Hazel continued, "but I think you understand me. I think you're not just a wolf. There's something else about you. Something more." The wolf tilted his head, studying her. "The village storyteller old Ruben Zuniga, he tells tales sometimes about shapeshifters, people who can become animals, or animals who can become people. Magic, he calls it. The old kind, from before the church came." Hazel paused, then added quietly, "Do you think that's real? Magic?" The wolf's ears flicked forward. Then, deliberately, he pressed his forehead against hers, a gesture so startlingly human that Hazel's breath caught. "I'll take that as a yes," she whispered. They stayed like that for a long moment, girl and wolf, sharing warmth in the gathering darkness. Around them, the forest whispered its ancient secrets. Snow began to fall, soft and steady. Finally, Hazel pulled back. "I have to go. Corinne will notice if I'm gone too long." She stood, brushing snow from her coat. "I'll come back tomorrow. I promise." The wolf watched her leave, as he always did. But tonight, after she'd disappeared into the trees, he did something different. He threw back his head and howled. The sound echoed through the forest, lonely and wild, and full of a fury that made the birds fall silent and the small creatures burrow deeper into their dens. It was the howl of something caged, something diminished, something that had once commanded packs and territories and now could barely walk without pain. But it was also a promise. The Alpha King would remember the girl who showed him kindness. And when his time came, when the curse finally broke, he would ensure that those who hurt her answered for it. The forest remembered. The wolves remembered. And debts, once made, must always be paid. 3 weeks later, on a night when the moon hung full and silver over Pinewood Hollow, Hazel woke to the sound of shouting. She jolted upright in her loft, heart pounding. Below, she could hear Corinne's voice, shrill with excitement. "In the village square tomorrow. The Duke himself is offering a reward." "What are you talking about?" Clint's voice, heavy with sleep and confusion. "Wolves, you fool. There's been wolf attacks on the trade roads. Livestock killed. The Duke wants them hunted down, every last one. He's offering 50 silver pieces for each wolf pelt brought to the garrison." Hazel's blood went cold. 50 silver? Clint sounded more awake now, interested. That's more than I make in 6 months of logging." "Exactly." Corinne's voice sharpened with calculation. "And you're one of the best hunters in Pinewood Hollow, Clint. Everyone says so. You could track down a dozen wolves before the season ends. We could finally have money. Real money. Enough to what?" A pause. Then, carefully, "Enough to send your daughter somewhere proper. A boarding school in the capital, perhaps. Somewhere she'd learn to be a lady instead of a wild thing. Somewhere, away from here." Hazel pressed her hand over her mouth to muffle the sound that wanted to escape. Below, her father was silent for a long, terrible moment. Then, "I'll go to the village in the morning. See about organizing a hunting party. That's my clever husband." Corinne purred. Hazel didn't sleep the rest of that night. She lay in the darkness, mind racing, hands clenched in her blanket. They were going to hunt wolves. Her father was going to hunt wolves. And somewhere in the forest, wounded and vulnerable, was the wolf who had trusted her. The wolf who pressed his head against hers like a friend. The wolf with golden eyes that understood far too much. She had to warn him, had to get to him before the hunting parties organized, before her father and his men took their guns and their dogs and their bloodlust into the forest. As soon as the first gray light of dawn crept through the gaps in the roof, Hazel climbed down from the loft. Corinne and Clint were still asleep behind their bedroom curtain. Moving silently, Hazel pulled on her coat, grabbed the last heel of bread from the kitchen shelf, and slipped out into the pre-dawn cold. The village was just beginning to wake, smoke rising from chimneys. A rooster crowing somewhere in the distance. Hazel ran past it all, her breath coming in white plumes, her feet crunching through the crusty snow. She had to reach him first. She had to warn him. The forest swallowed her like a secret, and Hazel ran faster, branches catching at her coat, snow soaking through her worn boots. Please, she thought, please still be there, please be safe. Behind her, in the village square, men were beginning to gather, hunters, farmers with guns, boys looking for glory. And in the cottage at the edge of town, Corinne Rocha smiled to herself as she counted imaginary silver coins and planned for a future that didn't include the burden of her husband's daughter. The hunt was coming, and blood would stain the snow before it was done. Chapter 3. The Warning and the Wound. Hazel burst into the clearing, her lungs burning, her legs trembling from the desperate sprint through the forest. Dawn light filtered weakly through the pines, turning the snow a pale, sickly blue. The boulder shelter loomed before her, dark and silent. "Please be here," she gasped, stumbling forward. Please be here." The wolf emerged from the shadows immediately, his golden eyes sharp with concern. He moved faster than he had in weeks. The wound had healed considerably, though Hazel could still see the raised scar tissue beneath his dark fur. He approached her quickly, almost urgently, as if sensing her distress. "They're coming," Hazel said, dropping to her knees in front of him. Her hands found his fur, clutching desperately. "The hunters. My father. The Duke is offering money for wolf pelts, and they're organizing parties, and they're going to come into the forest and—" She stopped, her voice breaking. The wolf stood perfectly still, his eyes locked on hers. In that moment, Hazel could have sworn she saw understanding flash across his inhuman face. Not just comprehension, but calculation, strategy. You have to leave, she whispered. You have to go deeper into the forest, somewhere they can't find you, somewhere safe. Do you understand? They'll kill you if they find you. The wolf made a low sound, almost like a sigh. Then he did something extraordinary. He pulled away from her grip, turned, and began limping toward the boulder shelter. Confused, Hazel followed. The wolf disappeared into the shadows between the rocks, and for a moment, she thought he was simply retreating, ignoring her warning. Then he emerged again, carrying something in his jaws. A leather pouch. Old, weathered, tied with a cord that looked like it had been torn by teeth. The wolf dropped it at Hazel's feet and sat back, watching her with those impossible eyes. "What is this?" Hazel asked, though she knew he couldn't answer. Her hands shook as she picked up the pouch. It was heavier than it looked, and something inside shifted with a metallic clink. She untied the cord. Gold coins spilled into her palm. Not one or two, but at least 20 more money than Hazel had ever seen in her entire life. Each coin was stamped with an unfamiliar crest, a wolf's head surrounded by a crown of thorns. "Where did you get these?" Hazel breathed. The wolf simply stared at her, waiting. Understanding crashed over Hazel like a cold wave. This wasn't just any wolf. Couldn't be. Wolves didn't carry coin purses, didn't understand human speech, didn't look at you with eyes that held more intelligence than half the people in Pinewood Hollow. "You're not really a wolf," she whispered. "Are you?" The wolf's ears flicked forward. He took a single step closer. And in the gray dawn light, something seemed to shift around him, a shimmer, like heat waves over summer stones, like magic trying and failing to take hold. Then it passed. And he was just a wolf again. But Hazel had seen enough. "You're cursed," she said with certainty, like in the old stories. "Someone turned you into this." She looked down at the gold coins in her hand, then back at the wolf. "And you want me to take this money?" "Why?" The wolf nudged the pouch with his nose, then looked pointedly at Hazel, then back toward the direction of Pinewood Hollow. "You want me to buy my way out?" Hazel asked slowly. "Use this to convince Corrine not to send me away?" The wolf's tail moved once. Not quite a wag, but an acknowledgement. Hazel's throat tightened. "I can't take your money. This is yours. You'll need it when you're human again. If you're human again." The wolf growled softly and pushed the pouch firmly against her knee. "You're really quite stubborn," Hazel said, and despite everything, the danger, the fear, the desperate situation, she found herself smiling. "Fine. But only if you promise to leave this place. Go north, deeper into the mountains. The hunters won't track that far. Not in winter. Promise me." The wolf held her gaze for a long moment. Then, deliberately, he pressed his forehead against hers one last time, warm, solid, real. "A goodbye." "Thank you," Hazel whispered. "For everything. For trusting me. For this." She clutched the pouch tightly. "I won't forget you. I promise." The wolf pulled back, turned, and began moving away from the boulder shelter. Not toward the village, but deeper into the forest, toward the dark heart of the wilderness where ancient trees grew so thick that snow never reached the ground. He paused once at the edge of the clearing, looking back at her with those golden eyes. Then he was gone, melting into the shadows like smoke. Hazel stood alone in the clearing, the leather pouch heavy in her hands, tears freezing on her cheeks. She'd saved him, given him a chance to escape the hunters. But her heart felt like it was being carved out of her chest. She returned to the cottage to find it in chaos. Men crowded the main room, hunters she recognized from the village, including her father's friends Palmer McDowell and Oscar Montoya. They were loading rifles, sharpening knives, checking their supplies. The air stank of gun oil and wood smoke and masculine excitement. Clint stood at the center of it all, directing operations like a general planning a campaign. He looked more alive than Hazel had seen him in months, his eyes bright, his shoulders squared. Purpose had returned to him, the purpose of the hunt. "Split into 3 groups, he was saying. "Palmer, you take the eastern woods. Oscar, you circle around to the south ridge. I'll lead the main party through the center, where most of the tracks have been spotted." "What about dogs?" Palmer asked. A grizzled man with a scarred face and hands like tree roots. "Borrowed 6 from the garrison. They're trained wolfhounds. best in the territory. If there's a wolf within 5 miles, they'll find it. Hazel's blood ran cold. Wolfhounds. She'd heard about those dogs, massive, vicious creatures bred specifically to track and kill wolves. Even a healthy, strong wolf would struggle against them. And her wolf, though healed, was still not at full strength. She had to believe he'd gotten far enough away. Had to hope that her warning had given him enough time. Hazel! Corinne's sharp voice cut through the noise. Where have you been? Every head in the room turned toward her. Hazel clutched the leather pouch inside her coat pocket, praying no one could see its outline. Walking, she said, the lie coming easily now after weeks of practice. Walking, Corinne repeated, her voice dripping with disdain. While your father prepares to save this family from poverty, you're out walking. How typical. Leave her alone, Corinne, Clint said absently, not even looking at Hazel. She's just a child. Just a child. Invisible. Irrelevant. Hazel slipped past the crowd of men and climbed the ladder to her loft. Behind her, the planning continued, voices rising and falling in excited discussion. They were talking about kill counts, about the best way to skin a wolf, about how many pelts they could realistically collect before spring. They were talking about murder like it was sport. Hazel pulled out the leather pouch and counted the coins again. 23 gold pieces, each stamped with that strange crest. In Pinewood Hollow, this was a fortune enough to buy a small house, enough to live comfortably for years, enough, perhaps, to buy her freedom. But first, she had to wait. Had to let the hunting party leave. Had to ensure they went in the opposite direction from where her wolf had fled. And then she would change everything. The hunting party left 2 hours later, a dozen men armed to the teeth, 6 massive hounds straining at their leashes. Hazel watched from her loft window as they marched toward the forest, her father at the lead, looking more like his old self than he had since her mother's death. He didn't look back at the cottage. Didn't say goodbye to Hazel. He never did anymore. When they disappeared into the tree line, Hazel climbed down from the loft. Corinne was in the kitchen, humming tunelessly as she prepared a meager lunch. She looked up as Hazel entered, her expression sour. What do you want? Hazel took a deep breath and pulled out the leather pouch. She set it on the table between them with a heavy thunk. Corinne's eyes widened. What is that? Open it. Corinne's fingers trembled as she untied the cord. The gold coins spilled across the rough wooden table, catching the light from the window, glowing like small suns. For a long moment, Corinne simply stared, her mouth opening and closing soundlessly. Where did you get this? She finally whispered. I found it, Hazel lied smoothly. In the forest. Someone must have dropped it. Found it. Corinne's eyes snapped up to Hazel's face, sharp with suspicion. You found a fortune in gold coins just lying in the forest. Yes. You're lying. Does it matter? Hazel asked, her voice harder than she'd ever dared use with her stepmother. It's gold. Real gold. Enough to keep you comfortable for years. Enough to make father stop logging if he wanted to. Enough to send you away properly. Corinne finished, her expression shifting from suspicion to calculation. To that boarding school in the capital. Somewhere you'd learn refinement instead of rolling in the dirt like an animal. Hazel's jaw tightened. Or enough to let me stay here without being a burden. This gold, it's mine. I found it. But I'm willing to give it to you, to the family, if you promise to stop talking about the workhouse. Stop talking about sending me away. Corinne picked up one of the coins, examining it closely. This crest. I've never seen anything like it. Does it matter? Hazel repeated. Gold is gold. For a long, tense moment, Corinne said nothing. Then, slowly, she began gathering the coins back into the pouch, her movements careful and possessive. Fine, she said finally. You can stay. For now. But this doesn't buy you love, girl. Or even respect. It just buys you a roof over your head and food in your belly. Don't expect anything more. I don't, Hazel said quietly. I never did. Corinne stood, clutching the pouch to her chest like a treasure. Your father will want to know about this. When he returns from the hunt, tell him whatever you want, Hazel said. Just keep your promise. Corinne swept out of the room without another word, already planning, no doubt, how to spend the windfall. Hazel stood alone in the kitchen, feeling hollow and strange. She'd bought her freedom. Protected her place in this house, at least for now. But at what cost? And would her wolf, her cursed, intelligent, impossibly kind wolf, survive the hunters now prowling the forest? Hazel closed her eyes and sent a silent prayer to whatever gods might listen. Keep him safe. Please. He saved me. Let me have saved him in return. The hunters returned 3 days later, exhausted and empty-handed. Hazel heard them before she saw them, the sound of men's voices raised in frustration, dogs barking and whining, boots stamping off snow. She was helping Corinne prepare dinner when the door banged open and Clint stumbled inside, his face gray with fatigue. Nothing, he said, collapsing into his chair. 3 days in the forest and we found nothing. No wolves, no tracks, nothing. It's like every wolf in the territory just vanished. Palmer and Oscar crowded in behind him, equally worn and disappointed. The Duke's men reported the same from their patrols. Palmer added, "It's the strangest thing. There were wolf tracks everywhere just a week ago, and now it's like they've all fled the region." "Fled where?" Oscar demanded. "Wolves don't just abandon their territory. Not without reason." "Maybe they sensed the hunt coming," Clint said tiredly. "Animals have instincts about these things." Or maybe, Hazel thought, one wolf warned the others. One wolf who understood human speech, who knew what was coming, who had the intelligence and authority to command a retreat. An alpha, perhaps. A king. She said nothing, just ladled soup into bowls, while the men discussed their failure. Corinne was uncharacteristically quiet, shooting Hazel occasional glances that held something new, not warmth exactly, but a grudging acknowledgement. The gold had bought Hazel a fragile peace, but late that night, as Hazel lay in her loft listening to the cottage settle into silence, she felt an ache in her chest that no amount of gold could soothe. She missed him. Missed the wolf with golden eyes who had trusted her, who had understood her, who had given her his treasure to keep her safe. She wondered if she'd ever see him again. And deep in the northern mountains, in a cave where ancient magic still lingered in the stones, a massive dark wolf lay curled in the shadows. His wound had fully healed now, leaving only a silver scar across his ribs. His golden eyes were open, staring into the darkness. He was remembering a small girl with kind hands and a brave heart. He was counting the days until the curse would break, and he was making plans, because the Alphaking never forgot a debt, and Hazel Wise had earned more than just his gratitude. She'd earned his protection, his loyalty, his throne. If she wanted it. The forest remembered. The wolves remembered. And soon, very soon, the humans would remember too, what it meant to have a king's favor, and what it cost to threaten those he'd sworn to protect. Chapter 4, 8 Years of Silence. Time moved differently in Pinewood Hollow. Days blurred into weeks, weeks into months, months into years. The seasons cycled, winter's brutal cold giving way to spring's hesitant warmth, summer's brief abundance yielding to autumn's dying light, and through it all Hazel grew. 10 became 11. 11 became 13. 13 became 15. And 15 became 18. The gold coins had changed everything and nothing. Corinne stopped threatening the workhouse, stopped speaking of sending Hazel away, but the coldness never thawed. If anything, it deepened. Because now Hazel wasn't just the unwanted stepdaughter, she was the unwanted stepdaughter who had somehow stumbled upon a fortune, who had bought her place in the household when love should have been freely given. Corinne never let her forget it. "Don't forget to fetch water from the well, dear," she would say, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "After all, you're earning your keep now, aren't you?" Or, "The floors need scrubbing. I know gold can buy many things, but it can't buy a work ethic, can it?" Hazel endured it. She'd learned to endure many things. Her father had changed too, in ways both subtle and profound. The gold had eased the worst of their poverty, but it had also removed his purpose. He no longer logged every day, no longer pushed himself to exhaustion to keep them fed. Instead, he spent long hours at the tavern, drinking away his memories, his guilt, his grief. He looked at Hazel even less than before, as if the gold she'd brought home had somehow tainted her, made her even more of a reminder of all he'd lost. So Hazel learned to be invisible, to move through the cottage like a ghost, doing her chores, eating her meals in silence, disappearing into the forest whenever she could. The forest. That remained her sanctuary. She still walked the same paths, still visited the boulder shelter in the clearing. But the wolf never returned. For 8 years Hazel had hoped, kept a piece of bread in her pocket just in case, scanned the shadows for golden eyes that never appeared. He was gone, either dead, or moved on, or perhaps the curse had broken and he'd returned to whatever life he'd had before. Whatever human life awaited a wolf who carried gold coins with a king's crest. Hazel told herself she was glad. He was safe, that's all that mattered. But late at night, alone in her loft, she sometimes took out the leather pouch, now empty, its contents long since absorbed into the household, and remembered the weight of his head against hers, the intelligence in those golden eyes, the impossible gentleness of a predator who had chosen trust over instinct. She had saved a wolf once. Perhaps that was enough of a legacy for a girl like her. Perhaps that was all she'd ever be allowed. On the morning of her 18th birthday, Hazel woke to find her father sitting at the kitchen table, a letter in his hands. It was the first time in months he'd been home at dawn. Usually, he stumbled in well after midnight, reeking of ale and failure. But today he was sober, his face grave, his hands trembling slightly as they gripped the parchment. "Father," Hazel descended from the loft cautiously. "What is it?" Clint looked up at her, and for just a moment, something flickered in his eyes, recognition, perhaps, or regret. Then it was gone, replaced by the usual distant exhaustion. "The Duke is dead," he said flatly. Hazel blinked. "What?" 3 days ago. Heart gave out apparently. His son is taking over the territory. Clint set the letter down on the table. "The new Duke is requiring all household heads to present themselves at the capital fortress within the month. Loyalty oaths, tax assessments, the usual transfer of power business." "Are you going?" Hazel asked. "Don't have much choice." Clint rubbed his face. "Your stepmother thinks it's a good opportunity. Apparently the new Duke is young, unmarried, and holding some kind of social gathering along with the official business. A way to meet the families of his territory." Understanding dawned slowly. "Corinne wants to go with you." "She wants you to go too." Hazel stared. "Me?" For the first time in years her father looked directly at her. Really looked. And Hazel saw something uncomfortable shift in his expression, surprise. Maybe, or shock at what he was seeing. Because Hazel wasn't 10 years old anymore. Wasn't the small, plain child who reminded him of his loss. She'd grown. Grown tall and slim, with her mother's dark hair that caught red highlights in the sun, with eyes that held depths of forest green and brown. She'd grown strong from years of forest walking, from hauling water and scrubbing floors and making herself useful. She'd grown into the kind of beauty that crept up quietly, not the obvious, golden beauty of girls like Corinne in her youth, but something subtler, deeper, the kind of beauty that made people look twice. "Corinne thinks." Clint paused, seeming to struggle with the words. "She thinks you might catch the Duke's eye. Make a good match. Secure our family's position in the territory." Hazel's blood went cold. "You want to marry me off? To a stranger?" "Not want," her father said quietly. "But it would solve certain problems. You're 18 now, Hazel. Old enough to make your own life. And a Duke, even a minor one, that's not an opportunity most girls in Pinewood Hollow get. So I should be grateful?" The bitterness in Hazel's voice surprised even her. "I should thank you for selling me like livestock." "That's not," Clint started, but the bedroom curtain swept aside and Corinne emerged, fully dressed, her face alight with purpose. "Good, you've told her," she said briskly. "We leave in 3 days. Hazel, you'll need a proper dress. I'll see about borrowing one from Judith Cox. Her daughter got married last spring. So the gown should still be decent. You'll need to do something about your hair too. It's always such a mess." "I'm not going," Hazel said. Corinne's eyes narrowed. "Excuse me. I said I'm not going. I'm not interested in meeting the Duke. I'm not interested in being paraded around like a prize horse. And I'm certainly not interested in being married off to secure your position." "Your position," Corinne corrected coldly. "Or have you forgotten that you live in this house by our charity? That every meal you eat, every piece of firewood that keeps you warm, comes from our generosity?" "My gold bought that generosity," Hazel shot back. 8 years ago, remember? The gold I found that kept this family afloat when Father's logging contracts dried up. The gold that paid for your new dresses and father's tavern bills and every comfortable year you've had since. The slap came fast and hard, snapping Hazel's head to the side. Her cheek burned, her vision blurred with shock and pain. You ungrateful little wretch, Corin hissed. After everything we've done for you. What have you done? Hazel asked, her voice shaking but steady. What have either of you actually done for me, except tolerate my existence? You want gratitude? For what? For making me feel like a burden every single day? For treating me like I killed my mother by being born? That's enough. Clint's voice cracked like a whip. He was standing now, his face flushed. Both of you. Enough. Silence fell, heavy and suffocating. Clint looked between his daughter and his wife, and Hazel could see the war playing out behind his eyes, duty versus guilt, responsibility versus the easier path of looking away. In the end, weakness won. It always did. You'll go to the capital, he said, not meeting Hazel's eyes. You'll be respectful, you'll wear the dress, and you'll make an effort. That's final. And if I refuse, then you can find your own way in the world, Corinne said sweetly. See how well that gold-bought independence lasts when you're on the streets with nothing but the clothes on your back. They would do it, Hazel realized, actually throw her out. After 8 years, after everything, they would discard her the moment she became inconvenient instead of useful. She'd always known it, deep down, but having it confirmed still felt like a knife between her ribs. Fine, Hazel said quietly. I'll go. I'll wear the dress. I'll smile and curtsy and play whatever role you want. Corinne's smile was triumphant. That's a good girl. But when this fails, when the Duke doesn't want me, when I don't catch his eye, you'll leave me alone. No more schemes, no more using me. Agreed? Agreed, Corinne said too quickly. Because she was already certain of success, already counting the benefits of having her stepdaughter married to nobility, Hazel climbed back up to her loft without another word. She lay on her narrow mattress, staring at the rough wooden beams above her head, her cheek still stinging from Corinne's slap. 18 years old. A woman grown. Still unloved, still alone. She closed her eyes and thought of golden eyes in the darkness, of a wolf who had understood her better than her own family ever had, wondered where he was now, what he was doing, if he ever thought of the small girl who'd fed him scraps and warned him of danger. Probably not. Why would he? She'd been nothing to him but a temporary kindness, a brief moment of mercy in an otherwise brutal existence. Just like she was nothing to anyone else. The thought should have made her cry. But Hazel was 18 now, and she'd learned years ago that tears changed nothing. So she lay in the darkness and planned. 3 days until they left for the capital. 3 days to prepare herself for whatever came next. And if the Duke did somehow want her, if Corinne's scheming actually succeeded well, perhaps a stranger's house would be better than this one. At least a stranger wouldn't look at her and see only the ghost of a dead woman. At least a stranger might see her at all. The journey to the capital took 2 days by wagon. Hazel sat in the back with the supplies, while Corinne and Clint occupied the front seat. They'd hired a driver, a taciturn man named Barney Mackenzie, who spoke only to his horses and seemed grateful for passengers who didn't require conversation. The borrowed dress lay wrapped in cloth beside Hazel. Pale blue silk that had probably been beautiful once but now showed signs of age, a small stain near the hem, slightly frayed sleeves. Still, it was finer than anything Hazel had ever worn. Corinne had also procured a pair of shoes that pinched and a shawl that smelled of camphor. You'll keep your mouth shut unless spoken to directly, Corinne had instructed that morning. You'll agree with whatever the Duke says. You'll be demure, modest, and above all, grateful for his attention. Do you understand? Hazel had nodded. What else could she do? Now, as the wagon jolted along the rutted road toward the capital, Hazel watched the forest pass by. It was late spring, and the trees were thick with new growth. Somewhere in those shadows, deer were bedding down for the day. Rabbits were tending their young. Wolves, if any remained, were sleeping in their dens. She wondered if her wolf had ever returned to his pack. If he'd survived long enough to break whatever curse had bound him. She wondered if he was happy. The capital city of Thornwick rose before them on the afternoon of the second day, a sprawling collection of stone buildings surrounded by high walls. The Duke's fortress dominated the skyline, a massive structure of gray stone with towers that seemed to scrape the clouds. Hazel had never seen anything so large, Pinewood Hollow could have fit inside the fortress courtyard 3 times over. Impressive, isn't it? Corinne said, her voice bright with ambition. This could be your home, Hazel. If you play your cards right. Hazel said nothing. Her stomach churned with anxiety, her hands clenched in her lap. The wagon joined a line of others, all families arriving for the Duke's gathering. All household heads bringing their wives and daughters to pledge loyalty, and presumably, angle for favorable matches. It took an hour to reach the fortress gates. Guards checked their names against a list, examined their wagon for weapons, and finally waved them through. The courtyard was chaos, wagons being unloaded, servants rushing about with luggage, families clustering nervously as they were directed to their assigned accommodations. Hazel spotted at least 50 young women, all dressed in their finest, all wearing the same desperate hope on their faces. Competition, that's what this was. A competition for a Duke's attention, for a chance to escape whatever small, suffocating lives they'd come from. And Hazel was just another contestant, whether she wanted to be or not. The gathering begins tomorrow evening, a harried servant told them, consulting his ledger. Loyalty oaths in the morning, social event in the evening. Your family is assigned to the East Wing, 3rd floor, room 12. Meals are served in the Great Hall. Don't be late. They were shown to their room, a small but clean space, with 2 narrow beds and a window overlooking the courtyard. Corinne immediately claimed the bed near the window, leaving Hazel and her father to share the other. Get some rest, Corinne ordered. Tomorrow is important. The most important day of your life, Hazel. Try not to ruin it. Hazel lay down on the edge of the bed, as far from her father as possible, and stared at the ceiling. Somewhere in this massive fortress, a Duke waited, a stranger who held her future in his hands, whether she liked it or not. And somewhere far away, in forests she'd probably never see again, a wolf with golden eyes was living whatever life fate had granted him. Hazel closed her eyes and tried to sleep. Tomorrow, everything would change. She just didn't know how much. Chapter 5. The Duke's Golden Eyes. The great hall of Thornwick Fortress was magnificent in a way that made Hazel feel small and out of place. Vaulted ceilings soared overhead, supported by massive stone pillars carved with wolves and thorned vines. Tapestries hung along the walls, scenes of hunts and battles, all rendered in rich reds and golds and deep forest greens. Chandeliers blazed with what must have been 100 candles each, turning the evening into false daylight. And everywhere, people. Hundreds of them. Hazel stood near the back of the hall, wearing the borrowed blue dress that didn't quite fit right, her hair pinned up in a style Corinne had insisted upon. The shoes pinched her feet mercilessly. She felt like an imposter, a forest girl playing dress-up in a world she didn't understand. Around her, the other young women preened and whispered, their eyes constantly darting toward the raised dais at the far end of the hall where the Duke would eventually appear. They looked like exotic birds, these girls, in their colorful gowns and elaborate hairstyles. They belonged here in a way Hazel never would. Stand up straight, Corinne hissed in her ear. And for God's sake, smile. You look like you're attending a funeral. Hazel forced her lips into something approximating a smile. Beside Corinne, her father shifted uncomfortably in his formal clothes, looking as out of place as Hazel felt. At least they had that in common. A trumpet sounded, sharp and clear, cutting through the noise. The crowd fell silent immediately, all eyes turning toward the dais. His Grace, Duke William Gillespie, Lord of Thornwick and Sovereign of the Northern Territories. The Duke emerged from a side door, flanked by advisors and guards, and Hazel's heart stopped. He was young, mid-20s, perhaps tall and powerfully built, with dark hair that caught reddish highlights in the candlelight. He moved with a predator's grace, confident and assured, commanding attention without effort. Handsome, certainly, in the sharp-featured way of nobility, but it was his eyes that stole Hazel's breath. Golden. Not brown with gold flecks, not hazel, but true gold. Like coins catching sunlight, like fire. Like a wolf's eyes. No, Hazel thought, her mind reeling. No, it's not possible. But even as she tried to deny it, recognition crashed over her like a wave. The way he moved, the way he held his head, the faint scar she could just barely see at his collar, disappearing beneath his formal jacket. a scar across his ribs, where a blade had cut deep, where a wound had nearly killed him. Oh God! The Duke William Gillespie scanned the crowd with those impossible golden eyes. His gaze swept over the sea of eager faces, dismissive, uninterested. He looked bored, actually, as if this entire gathering was a tedious duty he'd rather avoid. Then his eyes found Hazel, and stopped. The entire world seemed to hold its breath. Across the vast expanse of the great hall, Duke and Forest Girl stared at each other. Recognition flared in those golden eyes, bright and sharp and utterly unmistakable. He knew her. Remembered her. And she knew him. The wolf. Her wolf. The creature she'd fed and protected and warned of danger 8 years ago. The Duke's lips curved into the faintest smile, something private and knowing and meant only for her. Then, deliberately, he placed his hand over his heart and inclined his head. Just slightly. Just enough. A gesture of acknowledgement. Of greeting. Of remembered debt. Did you see that? Corinne's whisper was electric with excitement. He looked right at you. Hazel, he looked at you. Hazel couldn't respond. Couldn't breathe. Her mind was spinning, trying to process the impossible. The wolf had been real. The curse had been real. And he'd broken it somehow, sometime in the 8 years since she'd last seen him. Had reclaimed his human form, his title, his power, and he'd become a duke. No, not become. He'd always been a duke. Had always been nobility, trapped in fur and fangs by magic she couldn't begin to understand. The Alphaking, she'd thought all those years ago. She'd been more right than she knew. Your Grace. One of the advisors was speaking now, a thin man with a reedy voice. Perhaps you'd like to formally welcome your guests. Duke William, the name felt strange even in her thoughts, stepped forward to the edge of the dais. His voice when he spoke was rich and deep, commanding without being harsh. Welcome to Thornwick, he said. I know many of you have traveled far to be here, and I appreciate your loyalty during this time of transition. My father served these territories for 40 years, and I intend to honor his legacy while forging a new path forward. Standard political speech. Hazel barely heard it. She was too busy watching the way he moved, the way he held himself, looking for traces of the wolf in the man, and finding them everywhere. The way his head tilted slightly when listening, the predatory stillness of his posture, the intensity of his gaze when it fixed on something of interest. Even the way he dismissed the boring parts of being human, the empty pleasantries, the meaningless social rituals with barely concealed impatience. Feast will begin shortly, the Duke was saying. But first I'd like to meet some of you personally, starting with. His golden eyes swept the crowd again, and this time there was purpose in his gaze. The family from Pinewood Hollow, Clint Marquez, I believe? Corinne gasped. Around them, the crowd murmured surprise, envy, speculation. Go. Corinne shoved Hazel forward. All of us. Now. Hazel's father led the way through the parting crowd, Corinne practically vibrating with excitement beside him. Hazel followed on numb legs, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. They reached the dais, and Clint bowed awkwardly. Your Grace. We're honored by your attention. Clint Marquez, the Duke said, descending the steps to stand before them. Up close, he was even more imposing, tall enough that Hazel had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. I understand you're one of the best hunters in Pinewood Hollow, or at least, you were. 8 years ago, during the wolf hunts. Clint blinked, clearly surprised the Duke knew such a specific detail. Yes, Your Grace. Though the hunts proved unsuccessful, the wolves had fled the region. How fortunate for the wolves, the Duke said dryly. Then his gaze shifted to Corinne, who was already curtsying so low she nearly lost her balance. And you must be his wife, Corinne, Your Grace. Such an honor too. But the Duke had already moved on, his attention fixing entirely on Hazel. She curtsied because she had to, because everyone was watching, because Corinne would murder her if she didn't. But when she straightened, she found herself caught in that golden stare, and every coherent thought fled her mind. And you are? The Duke asked, though his tone made it clear he already knew. Hazel Wise, Your Grace, she managed. Her voice came out steadier than she felt. Hazel. He said her name like he was tasting it, testing its weight. An unusual name. From the tree, I assume? My mother liked the forest, Hazel said quietly. Something flickered across his face, recognition of a shared truth, perhaps. Did she? How interesting. I'm quite fond of forests myself. The silence that followed was charged with unspoken meaning. The crowd watched, fascinated, as the Duke continued to study Hazel with an intensity that should have been uncomfortable but somehow wasn't. Tell me, Hazel Wise, he said softly, his voice pitched low enough that only she could hear clearly. Do you still walk in the forest? Or have you outgrown such wild habits? It was a test. A question within a question. Do you remember? Do you know who I am? I still walk, Hazel said carefully. Though the forests around Pinewood Hollow feel emptier than they used to. The wolves left, you see. I've missed them. His smile was genuine this time, brief but real. Did you? How curious. Most people fear wolves. Most people don't understand them. And you do? I think. Hazel chose her words carefully, aware of the hundreds of ears straining to hear their conversation. I think wolves are more than they appear, more intelligent, more capable of gratitude than people give them credit for. The Duke's eyes blazed with something fierce and warm. I think you're right, he said quietly. Then louder, addressing the crowd. I find I'm quite exhausted from the day's ceremonies. The feast will continue without me. He turned back to Hazel. Miss Wise, would you join me for a private conversation? I have some questions about Pinewood Hollow that I believe you can answer. The great hall erupted in whispers. Corinne looked like she might faint from joy. Her father's face was carefully neutral, and Hazel felt like she was standing on the edge of a cliff, about to jump into unknown depths. Of course, Your Grace, she said. The Duke offered his arm. Hazel took it, feeling the solid strength beneath the formal jacket, feeling the warmth of him that reminded her of dark fur and winter nights. They walked together through the parting crowd, through the massive doors at the back of the hall, into a corridor lined with torches. Neither of them spoke until they were alone. Then, in the flickering shadows, Duke William Gillespie stopped walking and turned to face her. His hand came up slowly, carefully, as if approaching something precious and easily startled. His fingers brushed her cheek, the same cheek Corinne had slapped 3 days ago, now faded but still tender. You saved my life, he said quietly. His voice was different now, less formal, more raw. Fed me when I was starving, warned me when hunters came, gave me your gold to buy your own freedom. You remember, Hazel whispered. Every moment. His hand dropped away, but his eyes never left hers. Every kindness, every word you spoke to me in that clearing. I was trapped, cursed by a witch I'd angered, transformed into something powerless and prey. For 4 months before you found me, I'd been hunted, starving, dying slowly from that wound, and then you appeared. You gave me your gold, Hazel said. I should thank you for that. It saved me too. Did it? His expression darkened. From what I observed just now, you're still trapped. Still living under the thumb of people who don't value you. Still suffering small cruelties. His finger traced the air where her cheek had been struck. Not quite touching. Still being hurt. Hazel's throat tightened. How did you know? I know the look of someone carrying bruises, even when they've faded. His voice was soft but edged with something dangerous. Who hit you? It doesn't matter. It matters to me. The intensity in his gaze made Hazel's knees weak. This wasn't the bored nobleman from the great hall. This was the wolf, focused, protective, dangerous, when those under his care were threatened. My stepmother, Hazel admitted, but it was only once, just a slap. I've had worse. You shouldn't have had anything, he said fiercely. You saved my life, Hazel. Do you understand what that means? In the old laws, the laws that governed wolves and magic long before human courts, you own a debt. My debt, and I pay my debts. I don't want payment, Hazel said. I didn't help you expecting anything in return. I know. His smile was sad. That's exactly why you deserve everything I can give you. Because you're one of the few people in this world who would help without expectation of reward. He stepped back, his expression shifting into something more formal, more controlled. Here's what I propose. Stay at the fortress. Not as a guest, but as, let's call it, a lady in waiting. You'll have your own rooms, your own income, your own freedom. No more Pinewood Hollow. No more stepmother. No more father who can't bear to look at you. Hazel's heart raced. You're offering me a position in your household? I'm offering you a choice, he corrected. Something I suspect you've rarely had. You can return to Pinewood Hollow with your family if you wish. Or you can stay here, make a new life, and let me repay even a fraction of what you gave me. People will talk, Hazel said quietly. They'll assume. Let them assume whatever they want. His voice was hard. I'm the Duke. I'll do as I please. And what pleases me is ensuring that the girl who saved my life never suffers another moment of neglect or cruelty if I can prevent it. Hazel stared at him, this impossible man who had once been an impossible wolf, who remembered her kindness after 8 years, who looked at her like she mattered, like she was worth something. Why? She whispered. Why does it mean so much to you? It was just bread, just warning you about the hunters. Anyone would have. No. He cut her off gently. Not anyone. Most people would have run from a wounded wolf, would have told the hunters where to find me, would have seen a monster and treated me like one. But you saw past the form to what was beneath. You saw me, Hazel. When I was at my lowest, when I had nothing to offer, when I was as powerless as I'd ever been, you saw me and chose kindness. His hand found hers, warm and solid and real. Let me return the favor. Let me see you. Not as a burden, not as a mistake, not as something to be used or discarded, but as someone valuable, someone worth protecting, someone who deserves better than she's been given. Tears burned behind Hazel's eyes. She'd spent 18 years feeling invisible, unwanted, tolerated at best. And here stood someone, a duke, a former wolf, a man with power and position, telling her she mattered. I'll stay, she said, her voice barely a whisper. If you're certain. I've never been more certain of anything. A smile broke across his face, genuine and warm and surprisingly young. For just a moment, she could see the wolf in him clearly, the joy of a debt about to be repaid, the satisfaction of protecting someone under his care. Then it's settled, Duke William said. I'll have servants prepare a room for you in the south wing. Tomorrow we'll inform your family of your decision. And tonight, he paused, his expression turning mischievous. Tonight, would you like to see something the other guests won't? What? Hazel asked. His smile widened, showing teeth that seemed just a touch too sharp. The forest. There's a private garden beyond the fortress walls, old-growth trees, completely wild. I have a feeling you'd appreciate it more than the stuffy feast I'm supposed to be attending. Hazel's heart lifted. I'd love that. Good. He offered his arm again. Then let's escape, shall we? Before someone realizes the Duke has abandoned his own party. They walked together through the shadowed corridors, two people who had saved each other in different ways. Two souls who understood what it meant to be trapped and then freed. Behind them, in the great hall, Corinne was already planning wedding announcements. And ahead of them, under the stars and ancient trees, a new chapter was beginning. One written not in obligation or duty, but in recognition and gratitude and the slow, careful building of something that might become more than a debt repaid. It might become home. Chapter 6: The Garden of Thorns. The private garden was nothing like the manicured grounds Hazel had glimpsed from her window in the east wing. This was wild, ancient, a piece of true forest somehow preserved within the fortress walls, protected by high stone barriers and iron gates that looked like they'd stood for centuries. Oak trees towered overhead, their branches forming a canopy that blocked out most of the moonlight. Undergrowth grew thick between the paths, ferns and wild roses, thorned vines and moss-covered stones. It smelled like home. Like the forests around Pinewood Hollow. Like the clearing where she'd once fed a dying wolf. This is incredible, Hazel breathed, stepping off the formal path to run her fingers over the rough bark of an ancient tree. How is this here? Inside the fortress? Duke William followed her, moving through the shadows with that same predatory grace she remembered. He'd removed his formal jacket, rolled up his sleeves, and somehow looked more comfortable than he had in the great hall, more like himself, more like the wolf. My family has ruled these territories for 6 generations, he said. This garden was planted by my great-great-grandfather. He believed that nobles, especially those who govern forested lands, should never forget where true power comes from. Not from titles or gold, but from the wild places, from the roots that run deeper than human memory. He paused beside a massive oak, placing his palm flat against its trunk. This tree is 200 years old. It was here before the fortress, before the title, before any of us. And it'll be here long after we're gone. My ancestor had the fortress built around it specifically. Refused to cut a single tree when the walls went up. He sounds wise, Hazel said softly. He was also cursed, William said with a slight smile. By the same witch who cursed me, actually. Apparently, insulting powerful magic users runs in my family. We're not good at knowing when to keep our mouths shut. Hazel moved closer, curiosity overcoming her nervousness. What did you do? To make her curse you? William's expression darkened. I was 20 years old. Arrogant. Stupid. There was a woman in the northern villages, beautiful, mysterious, always alone. She propositioned me. And I turned her down. Rudely. Publicly. In front of witnesses who laughed at her rejection. He looked away, jaw tight. I didn't know she was a witch. Didn't know she was testing me, seeing if the young duke had any humility or kindness. I failed spectacularly, so she smiled and said, "You think yourself a king among men? Let's see how you fare as a beast." And then, wolf. Hazel finished quietly. Wolf. He confirmed. Trapped in that form. Unable to speak. Unable to change back. The curse would only break if someone showed me genuine kindness, without knowing who I was, without expecting reward or recognition. She wanted me to learn what it meant to be powerless. To be judged on appearance alone. To understand what I'd made her feel. He turned back to Hazel, his golden eyes catching the moonlight. For 4 months, I learned those lessons well. Other wolves drove me from packs I was too different, too new, not part of their hierarchy. Hunters shot me for sport. Villagers threw stones. The wound you saw? That came from a trap. Silver blades, designed to bleed slowly. To make death last days instead of minutes. Hazel's hand went to her chest, remembering the gash across his ribs, the way blood had matted his dark fur. I thought you'd die. That first night when I found your trail, I followed it expecting to find a corpse. You nearly did. His voice was rough. I was maybe 2 days from death when you appeared with that stale bread and your too large coat and your ridiculous bravery. A child, facing down a predator, offering food instead of fear. You never acted like a predator, Hazel said. You looked at me like you understood. Like you were thinking, not just reacting. I was trapped, not mindless. William moved closer, the space between them shrinking. I heard every word you said to me. Hazel, every story about your stepmother. Every confession about feeling invisible. I understood all of it because I was living it too. Invisible. Dismissed. Treated as less than human because of what I looked like. He stopped just a foot away, close enough that Hazel could feel the warmth radiating from him. When you warned me about the hunters, when you told me to run north, that's when the curse broke. Because you'd shown me pure kindness, expecting nothing. You saved me without knowing what I was, without hope of reward. The magic recognized truth, and released me. But you didn't come back, Hazel said, and hated how small her voice sounded. I waited. For weeks, then months. I kept bringing bread to the clearing just in case. Pain flashed across his face. I know. I watched you sometimes, from the trees. But I was dealing with the aftermath, reclaiming my title, managing the territory my father had let slip during my absence, hunting down the witch to ensure she couldn't curse anyone else. By the time I had everything under control, a year had passed. And I thought you would have moved on, forgotten the wolf. Why would you remember? How could I forget? Hazel whispered. You were the only one who listened, who understood. Even my own father stopped seeing me. But you always looked. I still see you. William reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away. When she didn't, his hand cupped her face with infinite gentleness. I've thought about you every day for 8 years. Wondered if you were safe, if you were happy. Hoped that the gold I gave you had bought you some peace. And when I saw you tonight, in that hall, looking so lost and alone despite being surrounded by hundreds of people, his thumb traced her cheekbone, careful and reverent. I knew I had to bring you here. Had to give you a choice. Had to offer you the same freedom you gave me when you warned me to run. Hazel's heart hammered against her ribs. She was standing in a wild garden with a duke who had once been a wolf, who looked at her like she hung the moon, who touched her like she was something precious instead of a burden. It felt like a dream, like magic. What if I'm not suited for this life? She asked, voicing the fear that had been growing since his offer. I don't know. Court politics, proper etiquette, how to be a lady in waiting. I'm just a girl from a small village who talks to animals and walks in forests. Good, William said firmly. I don't want someone suited for this life. I want someone real. Someone who understands that power comes with responsibility, that titles don't make you better than others, that kindness matters more than appearance. Someone who would feed a dying wolf instead of letting it suffer. His other hand came up, framing her face, his golden eyes blazing with intensity. You already know everything important, Hazel. Everything else can be learned. And I'll help you. I owe you that much. You don't owe me anything, Hazel said, but her voice lacked conviction. I owe you everything. His voice dropped lower, rougher. My life. My freedom. My understanding that there are still good people in this world. Let me repay that debt. Let me give you a life where you're valued instead of tolerated, where you're protected instead of hurt, where you're seen instead of invisible. Hazel's breath caught. No one had ever spoken to her like this. No one had ever looked at her like she mattered this much. Okay, she whispered. Yes, I'll stay. I'll try. The smile that broke across William's face was blinding. For just a moment, she saw the wolf in him completely, the joy of a pack member welcomed home, the fierce satisfaction of protecting what was his. Then he was a man again, pulling her into an embrace that felt like safety incarnate. Thank you, he murmured against her hair. For saying yes. For trusting me. For being brave enough to choose yourself. Hazel buried her face in his shoulder, breathing in the scent of him, wood smoke and pine and something wilder underneath. He felt solid and warm and real. Like the forest given human form. Like home. They stood like that for a long moment, two people who understood each other in ways that went beyond words. The garden whispered around them, ancient trees bearing witness to a promise being made. Finally, William pulled back, though his hands remained on her shoulders. Come. There's something else I want to show you. He led her deeper into the garden, following a narrow path that wound between massive oaks. The undergrowth grew thicker here, wilder. Thorned roses climbed the trees, their blooms closed for the night. The moonlight barely penetrated the canopy. They emerged into a small clearing where a stone fountain stood, ancient and moss-covered. Water trickled from the mouth of a carved wolf's head at its center, flowing into a basin that reflected the stars above. This is the heart of the garden, William said quietly. The oldest part. My great-great-grandfather had this fountain commissioned after his curse broke. The wolf represents what he was, what we all are beneath the civilized surface. The water represents cleansing, renewal, the chance to start again. He turned to Hazel, his expression serious. I come here when I need to remember. When court politics get too complicated. When the weight of the title feels crushing. When I forget what actually matters. This fountain reminds me that I was once powerless, once at the mercy of others, once saved by unexpected kindness. Hazel approached the fountain, trailing her fingers through the cool water. The carved wolf seemed to watch her with knowing stone eyes. I have a confession, she said softly. When I fed you, back in the forest, I wasn't trying to save you because it was the right thing to do. I was saving you because I was lonely, because you were the only one who didn't look at me with disappointment or frustration. Because even wounded and unable to speak, you saw me. Then we saved each other, William said, coming to stand beside her. I gave you recognition. You gave me survival. That's not a debt, that's an exchange between equals. A beginning. He reached into the fountain and pulled out something that gleamed in the starlight, a small silver pendant on a delicate chain. The pendant was shaped like a wolf's head, its eyes set with tiny golden stones. This belonged to my great-great-grandfather, William said, holding it carefully. It's been in the fountain since his death, a symbol of the debt his family owes to the wild places, to the magic that humbles us, to the lessons learned when we're stripped of everything but our true nature. He held it out to Hazel. I want you to have it. as a symbol of what we are to each other, not duke and subject, not debtor and creditor, but two people who understand what it means to be powerless and then given a chance to rise. Hazel's hands trembled as she took the pendant. It was warm from the water, surprisingly heavy for its size. The golden eyes seemed to glow in the moonlight. "This is too valuable," she whispered. "I can't." "You can," William said firmly. "And you will. Because you're part of this now. Hazel. Part of this family, this place, this history. You belong here." He took the pendant from her hands and moved behind her, carefully fastening it around her neck. His fingers brushed her skin, sending shivers down her spine. The wolf pendant settled at the hollow of her throat, warm and solid. "There," William murmured, his breath ghosting against her ear. "Now everyone will know you're under my protection, that you're not to be touched or threatened or dismissed. You're mine to guard." The possessiveness in his voice should have frightened Hazel. Instead, it made her feel safe for the first time in years. "What happens tomorrow?" she asked quietly. "When my stepmother finds out I'm staying? When people start asking questions? Tomorrow, I'll inform your family that you've accepted a permanent position at court," William said, returning to stand in front of her. "Your stepmother can speculate all she wants. Your father can feel whatever guilt or relief he chooses, but you won't be going back to Pinewood Hollow. Not unless you want to." His expression hardened. "And if either of them tries to force you, tries to manipulate or threaten you, they'll discover exactly how protective a duke can be. Especially one who remembers what it's like to be hunted." Hazel touched the pendant at her throat, feeling its weight. "You'd really stand against my own family for me?" "Without hesitation," William said. "You stood for me when I was nothing but a dying animal. I'll do no less now that I have power to wield." A sound echoed from the direction of the fortress music, laughter, the distant noise of the feast still continuing, the world they'd left behind, demanding their attention. William's expression soured. "I suppose we should return before someone organizes a search party. Can't have the Duke disappearing with a mysterious young woman on his first official gathering. The gossip would be insufferable." "Let them gossip," Hazel said, surprising herself with her boldness. "I spent 18 years trying to be invisible, trying not to be a burden. Maybe it's time I stopped apologizing for existing." William's smile was fierce and proud. "That's my girl. Come on then. Let's give the court something to talk about." They walked back through the wild garden together, side by side, the wolf pendant gleaming at Hazel's throat. Above them, the ancient trees whispered their approval, and somewhere in the darkness, a real wolf howled, distant and wild and free. It sounded like a promise. Like recognition between Alpha and rescued. Like the beginning of something that would change everything. They entered the great hall through a side entrance, drawing immediate attention. The feast was in full swing, nobles eating and drinking, musicians playing, dancers twirling across the floor. But the moment the Duke appeared, everything stopped. Especially when people noticed the silver pendant at Hazel's throat. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Corinne's face went white, then red, cycling through emotions too quickly to name. Clint simply stared, his expression unreadable. Duke William led Hazel directly to where her family sat, his hand firm at the small of her back. "A claim, a protection. Clint Marquez," William said, his voice carrying the weight of authority. "Your daughter has accepted a position as lady-in-waiting to the ducal household. She'll be remaining at Thornwick permanently. I trust this meets with your approval?" It wasn't really a question. More of a statement dressed in polite language. Clint opened his mouth, closed it, glanced at his wife. Corinne's eyes were locked on the pendant, calculating, scheming. "Of course, Your Grace," Clint finally said. "We're honored. Aren't we, Corinne?" "Extremely honored," Corinne managed, though her smile looked painful. "Hazel, darling, what a wonderful opportunity for you." Darling. Hazel had never been darling before in her life. "I'll arrange for her belongings to be collected from Pinewood Hollow," William continued smoothly. "Along with a stipend for your household compensation for losing a family member to court service. Shall we say 50 gold pieces? The exact amount the Duke had once offered for wolf pelts." Hazel bit back a smile. Corinne's eyes went wide. "That's very generous, Your Grace." I take care of those who serve me, William said, his golden eyes glinting with something dangerous. And I protect them fiercely. I trust there will be no issues with this arrangement. The threat was subtle but unmistakable. Hazel felt William's hand press slightly more firmly against her back. Reassurance, protection. A reminder that she wasn't alone anymore. No issues at all, Clint said quietly. For just a moment, his eyes met Hazel's, and something flickered there. Regret, maybe, or simply recognition that his daughter had found her own way out, without his help. Excellent. William turned to address the room at large, his voice carrying to every corner. I present to you Miss Hazel Wise, newest member of the ducal household. She's under my direct protection and will be treated with the respect due to her position. Anyone who has questions about this arrangement is welcome to bring them to me personally. The message was clear. Challenge this, and you challenge the Duke himself. The crowd murmured approval, though Hazel could see calculation in many faces. Questions. Speculation about what direct protection meant. About the pendant at her throat. About why a duke would single out a nobody from a backwater village. Let them speculate. Hazel lifted her chin, meeting their gazes steadily. She wasn't invisible anymore. Wasn't unwanted or unloved or disposable. She was seen, protected, valued, and she was exactly where she was meant to be, beside William, who had once been a wolf, who understood what it meant to be powerless, who looked at her like she was worth protecting. The feast continued around them, but Hazel barely noticed. She was too busy feeling the weight of the pendant at her throat, the solid warmth of William's presence beside her, the strange new lightness in her chest. Freedom, she realized. This is what freedom feels like. And it was just the beginning. Chapter 7, The Stepmother's Poison. Hazel's new chambers in the south wing were beyond anything she'd imagined. A sitting room with plush chairs and a writing desk. A bedroom with a canopied bed larger than her entire loft in Pinewood Hollow. Windows that overlooked the wild garden, letting in morning light and the scent of roses. Wardrobes already filled with gowns in deep greens and browns and blues colors that reminded her of the forest. His Grace wanted you to feel comfortable. The head housekeeper, a stern but kind woman named Delia Sutton, explained as she showed Hazel around. He specifically requested forest colors. Said you'd appreciate them more than the pastels most young ladies prefer. Hazel ran her fingers over a dress of deep emerald silk. He did? Spent an hour with the seamstresses yesterday, actually. Very particular about the details. Delia's expression softened slightly. In all my years serving this household, I've never seen His Grace take such personal interest in someone's comfort. You must have made quite an impression, Miss Wise. Please, just Hazel. Miss Hazel, then. Delia moved toward the door. I'll send a maid to help you dress for breakfast. His Grace has requested you join him in his private dining room at 8. Private dining room. Not the great hall with hundreds of eyes watching, but somewhere quiet, intimate. Hazel's stomach fluttered with nerves and something else, anticipation, maybe. Or the strange, unfamiliar warmth of being wanted. William was already seated when Hazel arrived, reading through a stack of documents with a slight frown. He looked different in the morning light, more human, less intimidating. His dark hair was slightly mussed, his shirt open at the collar, revealing the top of that scar she remembered so well. He glanced up as she entered, and his entire expression transformed. The frown disappeared, replaced by a smile that made her heart skip. Hazel, good morning. He stood, pulling out a chair for her. I hope you slept well? Better than I have in years, Hazel admitted, settling into the offered seat. That bed is obscenely comfortable. Good. You deserve comfort. William returned to his own chair, pushing the documents aside. I wanted to speak with you privately before the day begins. About expectations, boundaries, what this position actually entails. Hazel's hands twisted in her lap. I understand if there are duties. There are no duties, William interrupted gently. Not in the traditional sense. You're not actually a lady-in-waiting, Hazel. That's just the title I used to justify your presence here, without starting rumors that would complicate both our lives. Then what am I? You're my friend, he said simply. The only real friend I've had since the curse broke. Maybe the only real friend I've ever had. He leaned forward, his golden eyes serious. I don't want a servant, Hazel. I don't want someone who curtsies and says yes. Your Grace, and tells me what I want to hear. I want someone who'll be honest with me, who'll walk in the garden and tell me stories about the forest, who'll remind me what matters when court politics try to make me forget. Hazel's throat tightened. You're giving me a home just to have someone to talk to. I'm giving you a home because you deserve one, William corrected. And yes, because I'm selfish enough to want you close. To want to hear your voice and see your smile and know that someone in this fortress actually sees me instead of just the title. Before Hazel could respond, a sharp knock sounded at the door. William's expression darkened. Enter. A servant stepped in, nervous and apologetic. Your Grace, forgive the interruption, but there's a situation. Mrs. Corin Rocha is demanding an audience. She's been waiting in the antechamber for over an hour and refuses to leave until she speaks with you about Miss Wise. Hazel's stomach dropped. My stepmother, of course she is. William's voice was flat, controlled anger simmering beneath. Tell her I'll see her in my official receiving room in 10 minutes, and have guards present. The servant bowed and disappeared. William turned back to Hazel, his expression softening. You don't have to be there for this. I can handle her alone. No. Hazel straightened her shoulders. I should face her. I've spent 18 years letting her control me through fear. If I'm going to start fresh here, I need to prove to myself that she can't hurt me anymore. Pride flashed in William's golden eyes. Then we face her together. But Hazel, if at any point you want to leave, you leave. She doesn't get to abuse you anymore. That's not negotiable. The receiving room was formal and cold, designed to intimidate. High ceilings, stone walls, a raised dais where William sat in what could only be described as a throne. Guards flanked the doors, hands on sword hilts. Hazel stood beside the throne, the wolf pendant gleaming at her throat. She'd changed into one of the new dresses, the emerald silk that made her look older, more sophisticated, more like she belonged. Corin was ushered in, and Hazel almost didn't recognize her. Her stepmother looked diminished, smaller than Hazel remembered. The borrowed dress she wore was wrinkled from travel, her hair slightly disheveled. In the grand receiving room, surrounded by stone and guards and ducal authority, Corinne looked exactly like what she was, a provincial woman out of her depth, trying desperately to claw back control. Your Grace. Corinne curtsied deeply. Thank you for seeing me. Mrs. Rocha. William's voice was arctic. I'm told you refused to return to Pinewood Hollow without speaking to me. Explain. Corinne's eyes darted to Hazel, calculation evident in her expression. It's about my stepdaughter, Your Grace. I fear there's been a misunderstanding. Has there? Yes. You see, Hazel is, well, she's troubled, has been since childhood, prone to flights of fancy, telling elaborate stories, seeking attention in inappropriate ways. Corinne's voice dripped false concern. I'm worried she may have misrepresented her situation to gain your sympathy. Led you to believe she was mistreated when in fact… Stop. William's single word cracked like a whip. Before you dig yourself deeper into whatever pit you're creating, let me be very clear. I know exactly who Hazel is. I know exactly what her life has been like. And I know exactly what you are. Corinne's face went pale. Your Grace, I don't understand. You struck her, William said, his voice dropping to something dangerous. 3 days before you came here. Across the face, hard enough to leave a bruise. That was discipline, Corinne said quickly. She was disobedient, needed correction. She needed protection. William stood, descending from the dais with predatory grace. From you, from a woman who saw a child as nothing more than a burden to be tolerated or a commodity to be sold. Tell me, Mrs. Rocha, what was your plan? Marry Hazel off to me for your own advancement? Use her like a chess piece to secure your position. Corinne's silence was answer enough. William smiled, and it was terrifying. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to return to Pinewood Hollow with the 50 gold pieces I promised. You're going to tell everyone that Hazel has risen to a position of honor at court, and you're going to leave her alone, permanently. But she's my stepdaughter, Corinne protested. I have rights. You have nothing, William said flatly. Hazel is 18, an adult by law. She owes you no duty, no obedience, no acknowledgement, and if you attempt to contact her, manipulate her, or spread rumors designed to hurt her. He leaned forward, golden eyes blazing. I will make it my personal mission to ensure every creditor you've ever avoided, every shop owner you've cheated, every person you've wronged in your grasping climb through life, knows exactly where to find you. Do I make myself clear? Corinne's face cycled through rage, fear, and finally defeated calculation. Crystal clear, Your Grace. Good. You're dismissed. But Corinne wasn't quite done. As she turned to leave, she paused, looking directly at Hazel for the first time. You think you've won, she said quietly. You think you've escaped into some fairy tale. But you're still the same plain, forgettable girl you always were. And when His Grace tires of whatever novelty you represent, when he finds a real lady to marry, you'll be right back where you started. Alone. Unwanted. Invisible. The words hit like physical blows, finding all of Hazel's deepest fears and twisting. Because part of her, the small, damaged part that had internalized 18 years of emotional abuse, wondered if Corinne was right. But before Hazel could spiral, William moved. He crossed the distance between them in 3 strides and placed himself between Hazel and Corinne, a physical barrier. You're wrong, he said, his voice low and utterly certain. Hazel isn't plain. She isn't forgettable. And she will never be unwanted again. Because I see her. I value her, and unlike you, I understand that true worth has nothing to do with appearance or social standing and everything to do with character. He turned slightly, including Hazel in his protective stance. Hazel saved my life once, showed me kindness when I was powerless and dying. That debt doesn't expire, that recognition doesn't fade. She has earned a place here that you couldn't buy with all the gold in this territory. Corinne's expression twisted with something ugly jealousy, maybe, or simple viciousness. You're bewitched. It's the only explanation. She's done something. Used some forest magic. Guards, William said sharply. Mrs. Rocha is leaving. Now. Escort her to the gates, and ensure she departs immediately. If she attempts to return, she's to be turned away. The guards moved forward. Corinne opened her mouth to protest, caught the look in William's eyes, and thought better of it. She left in a rustle of skirts and impotent fury, her footsteps echoing in the stone corridor. When the doors closed behind her, silence fell. Hazel found she was shaking, not from fear exactly, but from the sheer intensity of the confrontation. Years of abuse condensed into minutes. Years of small cruelties finally acknowledged and rejected. Hazel. William turned to her, his hands gentle on her shoulders. Are you all right? I don't know, Hazel admitted. Her voice sounded distant to her own ears. She said, what if she's right? What if I am just novelty? What if… Stop. William cupped her face, forcing her to meet his eyes. Listen to me carefully. What Corinne said, every poisonous word that's not truth. That's the last desperate attempt of someone who's lost control to regain power. She wants you to doubt yourself because your confidence threatens her. But what if you do tire of me? The question escaped before Hazel could stop it, small and vulnerable. What if I'm not interesting enough, smart enough, refined enough? Then I'm a fool who doesn't deserve you, William said fiercely. Hazel, you saved my life. Do you understand what that means? Not just physically, but spiritually. You reminded me that there's good in this world, that kindness exists, that power isn't the only thing that matters. You did that when you were 10 years old with nothing but stale bread and a brave heart. His thumbs brushed away tears she hadn't realized were falling. You're not here because you're useful to me. You're here because you're important to me. Because when I look at you, I see the person who chose compassion over fear, who fed a monster instead of running, who warned me of danger at risk to herself. I see the person I want to become, he continued quietly. Brave enough to choose kindness even when it costs something. Strong enough to stand alone if necessary. Real enough to admit when she's hurting instead of hiding behind masks. Hazel's breath hitched. I'm scared. Of failing. Of disappointing you. Of proving Corinne right. Then be scared, William said simply. Fear is natural. But don't let it stop you from trying. Don't let her poison make you small again. You've already proven you're capable of extraordinary courage now. You just have to prove it to yourself. He pulled her into an embrace, and Hazel let herself be held. Let herself feel safe for just a moment in the circle of his arms. breathing in his familiar scent, feeling the solid warmth of him. "I'll try," she whispered against his shoulder. "I'll try to be brave." "You already are," William murmured. "You just need to see it." The rest of the day passed in a blur. Servants came and went, bringing meals Hazel barely tasted, offering assistance she didn't know how to accept. Delia showed her the library, 3 floors of books that made Hazel's heart soar. The head steward, a efficient man named Barry Hodges, explained her theoretical duties and then immediately said she should ignore most of them. "His Grace has made it clear you're here as a companion, not a servant," Barry said briskly. "You're to be comfortable, pursue whatever interests you wish, and generally be left alone unless you request otherwise." Quite unprecedented. But then, His Grace has always been unconventional. As evening fell, Hazel found herself back in the wild garden, seeking solace in the familiar comfort of trees and shadows. She'd changed into a simpler dress, one that allowed her to move freely and left her hair loose. She was sitting on the edge of the fountain, trailing her fingers through the water, when William found her. "I thought you might be here," he said, settling beside her. He'd changed too, out of formal clothes into something simpler. More like the wolf she remembered. "Corinne's words keep circling in my head," Hazel admitted. "I know they're poison. I know they're not true. But poison works by being partly believable," William finished. "By finding the fears we already carry and amplifying them." "Yes." Hazel looked at him, this impossible man who had once been an impossible wolf. "How did you deal with it? After the curse broke, when you had to reclaim your life, how did you silence the voices telling you that you'd failed, that you weren't worthy, that you deserved what happened?" William was quiet for a long moment, staring into the fountain's depths. "Honestly, I didn't. Not at first. I carried the curse's lessons like scars, convinced I was arrogant, that I deserved punishment, that I needed to earn back my right to exist." He turned to face her fully. "It took time to understand that learning from mistakes doesn't mean drowning in shame, that growing doesn't require destroying yourself first, that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is accept that you deserve kindness, even from yourself." His hand found hers in the water, their fingers tangling. "We'll figure it out together. Both of us learning how to be seen, how to be valued, how to believe we're worthy of the good things we've found. It won't be easy. Corinne's poison will whisper in your ear sometimes, and the witch's curse will echo in mine, but we'll remind each other of the truth." "What truth?" Hazel whispered. "That we saved each other," William said simply. "That we chose kindness when cruelty was easier. That we're brave enough to try, even when we're scared. That we're worthy of the home we found together." Above them, stars began to emerge in the darkening sky. The fountain murmured its endless song, and in the shadows between the ancient trees, the world felt vast and full of possibility. "Thank you," Hazel said quietly, "for defending me today, for seeing past Corinne's poison, for believing in me when I'm still learning to believe in myself. Always," William promised. "That's what pack does, we protect each other." "And Hazel?" "I won." His golden eyes gleamed in the starlight. "Your pack now." "My pack. Nothing changes that." Hazel squeezed his hand, feeling the strength in his grip, the certainty in his words. Maybe she wasn't invisible anymore. Maybe she was exactly where she belonged. Maybe, just maybe, this was her home. And as night fell over Thornwick, in the wild garden where wolves had once been honored and magic still lingered in the stones, 2 souls who had saved each other sat together in comfortable silence, learning what it meant to be seen, learning what it meant to be free. Chapter 8. The Witch's Return. 3 months passed like a dream. Hazel settled into life at Thornwick with surprising ease. She spent her mornings in the library, devouring books on history, philosophy, and botany. Her afternoons were often spent with William walking in the wild garden, discussing territory matters he valued her input on, or simply existing in comfortable silence while he worked through documents, and she sketched the plants she'd observed. The court had stopped whispering about her presence. Or rather, they'd grown accustomed to it. The Duke's unusual companion, they called her. The forest girl who'd somehow earned the Alpha's favor. Some still speculated about the nature of their relationship. Others simply accepted that William Gillespie did as he pleased, and questioning him was pointless. Hazel found she didn't care either way. For the first time in her life, she was content. But contentment, she was learning, was a fragile thing. The first sign of trouble came on a gray morning in early autumn, when Hazel woke to find the wild garden transformed. Every rose had turned black overnight. Not withered, transformed. The blooms remained full and perfect, but their petals had become the color of midnight, and when Hazel touched one, it felt cold as ice. "William," she breathed, finding him already in the garden, staring at the corrupted flowers with an expression she'd never seen before. "Fear. She's here," he said quietly. "The witch. Somehow she's breached the wards. The one who cursed you?" "Yes." William's hand went to his ribs, unconsciously touching the scar beneath his shirt. "She disappeared 8 years ago, after I confronted her following the curse breaking. I thought she'd fled the territory, gone somewhere I couldn't reach, but if she's returned..." He didn't finish the sentence. Didn't need to. A woman's voice drifted through the garden, melodic and mocking. "Poor little Duke. Did you think I'd forgotten about you?" She emerged from the shadows between the oaks like smoke taking form. Beautiful in a terrible way, ageless features, silver hair that moved in a wind that didn't exist, eyes that swirled with colors that had no names. She wore a dress of midnight blue that seemed to be made of starlight and shadow. The witch. Rosalind McBride. William had called her once. A name that felt wrong in the mouth, like it was merely a costume worn by something far older. Rosalind. William moved to place himself between the witch and Hazel. "You're not welcome here. The curse is broken. Our business is concluded." "Is it?" Rosalind tilted her head, studying William with those impossible eyes. "I lifted the curse, yes. But I never said you were free of me, William Gillespie. Curses are just the beginning. The real punishment comes after." Her gaze shifted past William, landing on Hazel. "And who is this? Let me see." "Ah. The girl. The one who fed you scraps and warned you of hunters. The one whose kindness broke my carefully crafted spell." Hazel felt those swirling eyes pierce through her, seeing things that should have remained hidden. Her fears, her doubts, the small wounded parts she tried to keep buried. "She's under my protection," William said, his voice taking on an edge that reminded Hazel of the wolf, dangerous, territorial, ready to defend. "Is she?" Rosalind smiled, showing teeth too white and perfect. "How sweet. The Duke has found someone to protect. Tell me, does she know what you really are, William? Not just the wolf, that's surface level. Does she know what runs in your blood? What your family has done for generations? Whatever games you're playing, leave Hazel out of them." "I'm not playing games." Rosalind's expression turned serious, almost sad. "I'm here to finish what I started. You learned humility. Yes. Learned what it means to be powerless, but you didn't learn the most important lesson." She raised her hand, and the air around her shimmered with power. "You didn't learn that power always has a price, that those who wield it are responsible for how it's used, that your family's legacy, all those wolves protecting these territories, all that ancient magic bound into the bloodline, that legacy is built on bones and bargains you've never questioned." William's face had gone pale. "What are you talking about?" "Your great-great-grandfather," Rosalind said quietly. "The one who planted this garden. The one who was cursed and saved, just like you. Do you know what he did to break his curse? What price he paid for his freedom?" Silence. Heavy and terrible. "He promised his bloodline to the forest," Rosalind continued. "Every third generation, a child of his line would be given back to the wild, transformed permanently, a wolf forever, to maintain the balance between human and nature, civilization and magic. It was the condition of his salvation." Hazel's blood went cold. "No." "Oh yes." Rosalind's eyes fixed on William. "And you, Duke William Gillespie, are that third generation. Your curse wasn't just punishment for arrogance. It was preparation, a preview of what's coming. Because in 3 days, on the autumn equinox, when the veil between worlds is thinnest, the debt comes due. You'll transform again, not as punishment, but as payment, and this time, there's no breaking it." William stood frozen, his face a mask of shock and denial. "You're lying." "Am I?" Rosalind gestured to the blackened roses. "Test me." Try to remove these roses. Try to change them back. You'll find you can't. They're tied to your fate now. As you transform, they'll spread through the entire garden, then the fortress, then the territory. A reminder that debts must be paid, that balance must be maintained. She turned to leave, her form already beginning to fade. 3 days, William. Spend them well. Say your goodbyes. Make your peace. Because when the equinox comes, the Duke dies and the wolf remains. Wait. Hazel found her voice, stepping forward despite William's protective stance. There must be another way. A loophole. Something. Rosalind paused, looking back with something that might have been pity. There is one way. One possibility. Hope flared in Hazel's chest. Tell us. The bargain requires a wolf from the bloodline, Rosalind said slowly. It doesn't specify which wolf. If another of William's blood were to take his place, volunteer to transform instead, the debt would be satisfied. I'm the last of my line, William said flatly. My father is dead. I have no siblings, no cousins. There's no one else. No living relatives. No, Rosalind agreed. But bloodlines are tricky things. Sometimes they branch in unexpected ways. Sometimes there are connections neither party knows about. Her swirling eyes fixed on Hazel. Sometimes a girl who shares no legal relation might still carry traces of ancient bloodlines in her veins. Might still be close enough to satisfy the bargain if she were willing. Hazel's mind reeled. What are you saying? Your mother, Rosalind said softly. Where was she from? Who was her family? I don't know. She died when I was born. My father never spoke of her past. Convenient. Rosalind's smile was knowing. Perhaps you should ask him. Perhaps there are secrets in your lineage that might change everything. Or perhaps. She shrugged, already fading into shadow. Perhaps I'm simply giving you false hope to make these last days more bitter. You'll have to figure it out yourselves. And then she was gone, vanished like morning mist, leaving only the corrupted roses and the weight of her words behind. William and Hazel stood in the garden for a long time, neither speaking. The blackened roses seemed to whisper around them, promises of transformation, of debts coming due, of fate closing in like a trap. Finally, William turned to Hazel, his golden eyes dim with resignation. 3 days. We'll find another way, Hazel said fiercely. We'll research. We'll look for loopholes. Will. Hazel. He cupped her face gently. There is no other way. Believe me. My family has been looking for one for generations. The bargain is ironclad. Every 3rd generation. A wolf. And I'm that generation. Then we'll go to my father, Hazel insisted. Ask him about my mother's bloodline. If there's any chance I'm connected, I won't let you sacrifice yourself for me. William's voice was hard, final. Even if you could take my place, even if your bloodline somehow qualified, no. I won't allow it. You don't get to decide that. I'm the Duke. I decide everything within these borders. They glared at each other. And for the first time since she'd arrived at Thornwick, Hazel felt the weight of the power imbalance between them. He was nobility. She was. What? A former nobody given a place through charity. Is that how it is? Hazel asked quietly. You make all the decisions, and I'm just supposed to accept them? Because you're the Duke, and I'm nothing? William flinched like she'd struck him. That's not what I meant. Then what did you mean? Hazel's eyes burned with tears. She refused to shed. You get to save me, but I don't get to save you? You get to protect me, but I have no say in protecting you back? That's not friendship, William. That's ownership. I'm trying to keep you safe, and I'm trying to do the same for you. Hazel's voice cracked. You saved my life, not physically maybe, but in every way that matters. You gave me a home, purpose, worth. You made me feel seen for the first time in my life. And now you expect me to stand by and watch you be transformed into a wolf forever? To lose you without even trying to find another way? William's expression crumbled. I don't want to lose this. These 3 months, they've been the happiest of my life. I don't want them to end. Then fight. Hazel grabbed his hands, squeezing tight. We have 3 days. 3 days to research, to find loopholes, to discover if my mother's bloodline connects somehow. 3 days to exhaust every possibility before we accept defeat. Please, William. Let me try. Let me be brave for you the way you've been brave for me." He stared at her for a long moment, conflict warring in his golden eyes. Then, slowly, he nodded. 3 days, he agreed quietly. "We try everything, exhaust every option. But Hazel, if we can't find another way, if the only choice is you or me, I choose me. I won't let you sacrifice yourself. That's non-negotiable." It wasn't a promise Hazel intended to keep if it came to that. But she nodded anyway, accepting the temporary truce. 3 days, she echoed. "Then let's not waste a moment." They started in the library, pulling every book on bloodline magic, ancient bargains, and transformation curses. Barry and Delia, when informed of the situation, mobilized the entire household staff to help. Servants searched archives, questioned old-timers in the surrounding villages, sent urgent messages to scholars across the territory. Meanwhile, Hazel sent a rider to Pinewood Hollow with a message for her father. "I need to know about my mother's family, her bloodline, everything. It's urgent." The first day passed in a blur of ancient texts and dead ends. Every source confirmed what William already knew: the bargain was absolute. Every 3rd generation, a wolf, no exceptions. The second day, they found records of William's great-great-grandfather's original curse and salvation. The details made Hazel's stomach turn. He'd been cursed for hunting wolves to extinction in the Northern Territories, slaughtering entire packs for sport and profit. His salvation had come at the cost of promising his bloodline would provide balance, 1 permanent wolf per 3 generations, to restore what he'd destroyed. "My family built our wealth on wolf pelts," William said quietly, staring at the records. "Thousands of them. We nearly wiped out the entire population before the witch intervened. The curse wasn't cruelty, it was justice. Restoration of balance. That doesn't make you responsible for your ancestors' crimes," Hazel argued. "Doesn't it?" William's expression was bleak. "I inherited his wealth, his title, his power. Why shouldn't I inherit his debts?" Hazel had no answer for that. On the evening of the second day, the rider returned from Pinewood Hollow. He brought a letter from Clint Marquez, brief, hastily written, heavy with words that had been held back for 18 years. "Hazel, your mother's family came from the deep forests north of here. They called themselves the Wolf Keeper's old bloodline, older than any duke or territory. They lived alongside wolves, protected them, were said to share their magic. My wife refused to speak of them, said she'd left that life behind when she married me. She had a mark on her shoulder, a wolf's head, like a birthmark but too perfect. You have the same mark. I saw it the day you were born. I don't know if this helps. I don't understand what you're involved in. But if you carry your mother's blood, you carry something ancient, something the forests recognize. Be careful. Your father." Hazel's hand went unconsciously to her left shoulder, where beneath her dress, a birthmark she'd always had suddenly felt like it was burning. A wolf's head, wolf-keeper blood. "It's enough," William said, reading over her shoulder. "Your bloodline qualifies. You could take my place." "No," Hazel said firmly. "We use this information to find another way. If my bloodline connects to wolves, maybe I can negotiate with the magic. Maybe nothing." William's voice was gentle but final. "Hazel, we have 1 day left. 1 day before the equinox. And I'm not going to spend it watching you throw yourself into danger for me." "Then what are you going to spend it doing?" Hazel demanded. "Accepting defeat? Preparing to be a wolf forever?" "I'm going to spend it with you," William said quietly. "However much time we have left, I want to spend it here, in this garden, with the person who saved me, the person who made these last months worth living." Hazel's eyes burned with tears. "That's giving up. That's acceptance." William pulled her close, pressing his forehead to hers in a gesture that echoed their first meeting. Wolf to girl, then to now. "Hazel, I'm not afraid of being a wolf again. I survived it once, I'll survive it permanently. But I am afraid of losing you, not to transformation, but to foolish sacrifice. Promise me you won't do anything reckless. Promise me you'll let this play out as it must." Hazel closed her eyes, breathing in his familiar scent, feeling the solid warmth of him, and lied. "I promise," she whispered, because she'd learned something in her 18 years of being invisible, of being forgotten, of being the burden no one wanted. She'd learned that sometimes, The bravest thing you can do is break a promise to save someone you love. And Hazel loved William Gillespie. Loved him as a friend, as a protector, as the wolf who had understood her, and the man who had saved her. She would not let him be transformed, would not let him pay for his ancestors' crimes, even if it meant transforming in his place, even if it meant becoming a wolf forever. Tomorrow was the equinox. Tomorrow, the debt came due. And tomorrow, Hazel would do what she'd always done best. She would save the wolf. Chapter 9. The Equinox Sacrifice. The autumn equinox dawned gray and cold, mist clinging to the fortress walls like grasping fingers. Hazel had barely slept. She'd spent the night in the wild garden, sitting by the fountain where the carved wolf seemed to watch her with knowing stone eyes. The blackened roses had spread further now they covered half the garden, their cold petals releasing a faint scent of magic and inevitability. William found her there at dawn, 2 cups of tea in his hands. He looked as exhausted as she felt. Shadows under his golden eyes, tension in every line of his body. "Couldn't sleep either?" he asked, settling beside her on the fountain's edge. "No." Hazel accepted the tea, wrapping her cold hands around the warm cup. "What time does it happen?" "Sunset. When day and night are perfectly balanced." William's voice was steady, controlled. He'd made his peace with this, or at least convinced himself he had. "The magic will pull me to this garden specifically. It's the heart of the original bargain, where my ancestor first made his promise. I'll transform here. And then?" Hazel prompted when he trailed off. "And then I'll run," William said quietly. "Into the deep forest, away from civilization. I can't stay here, Hazel. Can't risk the wolf taking over completely. Forgetting who I was. Better to live wild and free than caged and mad. You're really going to accept this?" It wasn't a question. "I have to." He looked at her, gold eyes filled with regret and resignation. "There's no other way. We've exhausted every possibility. The magic is absolute." Hazel said nothing, just sipped her tea and watched the mist curl through the corrupted garden. She'd made her decision hours ago, in the dark before dawn. Had written letters, one to William, one to Delia, one to Barry. Had studied the research they'd compiled, understanding now how the magic worked, how the bargain measured bloodlines, how a voluntary sacrifice could redirect the transformation. All she needed was the right moment. The day passed with agonizing slowness. William insisted on spending it together, showing Hazel his favorite places in the fortress, telling her stories about his childhood before the curse, making her promise to take care of the wild garden after he was gone. "The roses will return to normal once the debt is paid," he explained as they walked through the corrupted blooms. "The magic won't need to mark them anymore. I want you to tend them. Keep this place wild and free. It's important." "I will," Hazel said, her throat tight with words she couldn't speak. Not yet. They had lunch in the private dining room where they'd eaten so many meals together, though neither could manage more than a few bites. They walked the fortress walls, looking out over the territory William would no longer rule. They sat in comfortable silence in the library while afternoon light slanted through the windows. And all the while, Hazel felt time slipping away like sand through her fingers. Finally, as the sun began its descent toward the horizon, William stood. "It's time. The magic is already pulling at me, I can feel it. We should go to the garden." Hazel followed him on numb legs, her heart hammering. The garden was different now. The mist had thickened, and the air itself seemed to hum with power. The blackened roses had spread to cover everything, turning the wild garden into something otherworldly. Dangerous. Magic made visible. William walked to the center, to the fountain where the carved wolf watched. His hands were shaking slightly, but his voice remained steady. "Hazel, I need you to leave before it happens. Go back to the fortress, stay inside. The transformation, it's not gentle. Not something you should witness. No." Hazel moved to stand in front of him, her hand finding his. "I'm not leaving you alone for this. I'm staying until the end. Hazel, please." Her voice broke. "You've given me so much. Let me give you this, someone who sees you, right until the last moment. Someone who'll remember William Gillespie the man, not just the wolf." Pain and gratitude warred in his expression. Finally, he nodded. All right. But promise me you'll be safe. Promise you'll leave if it becomes dangerous. I promise, Hazel said. Another lie. The last one. The sun touched the horizon, and the garden exploded with power. Light erupted from the fountain, spreading in waves across the corrupted roses. The carved wolf's eyes began to glow with the same golden fire that burned in William's gaze, and William himself gasped, doubling over as magic seized him. It's starting, he gritted out. Hazel, please, I'm not going anywhere. His body began to change, bones shifting, muscles reforming. The transformation was brutal, agonizing. Hazel watched with tears streaming down her face as the man she loved was forcibly reshaped into the wolf he'd once been. But she didn't look away. Wouldn't dishonor him by flinching from his pain. William's clothes tore as his form expanded, dark fur erupting across his skin. His hands became paws, claws digging into the earth. His face elongated into a muzzle, teeth sharpening, golden eyes remaining constant through the horror of transformation. Within minutes, the man was gone. In his place stood a massive wolf, bigger than the wounded creature Hazel had fed years ago. Magnificent and terrible, and heartbreakingly familiar. The wolf that had been William looked at her with those golden eyes, and Hazel saw recognition there. Awareness. He was still in there, still fighting to hold on to his humanity. But the magic wasn't finished. Chains of light erupted from the fountain, wrapping around the wolf, binding him. Not physical chains, these were magical, designed to drag him away, pull him into the deep forest where he would run wild forever. This was the moment. Now or never. Hazel stepped forward, placing herself between the wolf and the pulling magic. She felt the power of the bargain recognize her, felt it measure her blood, her lineage, her wolf-keeper heritage. And she spoke the words she'd found in the ancient texts, the formula for voluntary sacrifice. I, Hazel Wise, daughter of wolf-keeper blood, offer myself in place of William Gillespie. I claim the right of substitution, blood for blood, wolf for wolf. Let the debt be mine. No. The word came from the wolf, distorted but recognizable. William's voice, fighting through the transformation. Hazel, don't. But it was too late. The magic seized her like a lightning strike. Hazel screamed as power flooded through her veins, burning, reshaping, transforming. She felt her bones begin to shift, felt fur starting to erupt across her skin. The wolf-keeper mark on her shoulder blazed with heat, spreading, consuming. This was it. She was transforming, taking William's place, saving him, even if it cost her everything. But then, the garden exploded with silver light, and a new voice cut through the chaos. Enough. Rosalind McBride stepped out of the shadows, no longer mocking or cruel. Her expression was grave, almost sad. She raised her hands, and the transformation magic froze, not stopped, but suspended, holding Hazel halfway between human and wolf. You foolish, brave child, Rosalind said quietly. Do you have any idea what you've just done? Hazel couldn't speak, her throat was caught mid-transformation, her vocal cords somewhere between human and animal, but her eyes burned with defiance. I saved him. That's what matters. Rosalind turned to the wolf that was William, who had broken free of the chains and was desperately trying to reach Hazel. And you? Were you really going to let her do this? Accept her sacrifice without protest? The wolf snarled, a sound of pure anguish. I thought not. Rosalind's expression softened slightly. Here's what neither of you understood. What I was testing for. The bargain requires a wolf, yes, but it doesn't require a permanent transformation. It requires willingness to sacrifice, understanding of cost, recognition that power demands responsibility. She gestured, and the magic shifted, changing. Your great-great-grandfather agreed to give a wolf because he'd taken so many, but the true payment isn't the transformation, it's the lesson. The understanding that every power comes with a price, that every privilege demands service. Rosalind looked between them, Hazel frozen in transformation, William trapped in wolf form. Both of you were willing to sacrifice yourselves for the other. Both of you understood the cost and chose to pay it anyway. That's the lesson. That's what the bargain actually measures. Not bloodline or form, but character. Willingness to protect those you love, even when it costs everything. She waved her hand, and the transformation magic began to reverse. Hazel gasped as her body shifted back to human, bones reforming, fur receding. Within moments, she was herself again, shaking, exhausted, but whole. And William, the wolf's form shimmered, and suddenly William Gillespie stood there, human and naked, and staring at Rosalind with shock and desperate hope. "What are you saying?" he demanded. "I'm saying the debt is paid," Rosalind said simply. "You both proved you understood the lesson. You both demonstrated the character your ancestor lacked, willingness to sacrifice for others, understanding that power means protecting the vulnerable, recognition that nobility is earned through action, not inherited through blood." She turned to leave, already fading. "The bargain is satisfied, the wolves are restored, and you too." A ghost of a smile crossed her ageless face. "You're free, both of you, to live as you choose, to build whatever life you want, together." "Wait." Hazel found her voice. "Why? Why test us like this? Why put us through?" "Because power without testing becomes corruption," Rosalind said quietly. "Your family needed to learn that lesson every generation, William. Needed to be reminded that your privilege comes with responsibility, that the wolves you once hunted are under your protection now. That nobility means service, not dominion." "And me?" Hazel asked. "What was my part in this?" "You were his salvation," Rosalind said. "Then and now. The girl who showed kindness to a wounded wolf. The woman who would transform herself to save him. You broke his first curse with compassion. You broke this one with courage." She was almost gone now, just a shimmer in the twilight. "The garden will heal. The roses will bloom red again by morning. And you too. Well, you'll figure out what comes next. You always do." And then she was gone. Silence fell over the garden. The corrupted roses were already changing, black petals shifting to deep red, life returning to what had been marked by death. Hazel and William stared at each other across the fountain, both trembling, both hardly daring to believe it was over. Then William moved, closing the distance between them in 3 strides, and pulling her into his arms with desperate intensity. "You idiot," he choked out, his face buried in her hair. "You beautiful, brave, reckless idiot. You were going to transform for me. Actually do it." "Of course I was," Hazel said, her voice muffled against his shoulder. She was shaking, reaction setting in. "Did you really think I'd let you sacrifice yourself? After everything you've done for me? I told you not to do anything reckless. And I told you I wouldn't let you face this alone." Hazel pulled back enough to look at him, tears streaming down her face. "We save each other, William. That's what we do. That's what we've always done." He cupped her face in his hands, his golden eyes blazing with something fierce and tender. "I thought I'd lost you. When I saw you start to transform, I thought, but you didn't." Hazel covered his hands with hers. "We're both here. Both human. Both free." "Both free," William repeated, wonder creeping into his voice. "The curse is broken. Actually, truly broken. I'm not going to transform. I'm not going to lose myself. We're free," Hazel finished. Then, before she could second-guess herself, she kissed him. For a moment, William froze in surprise. Then his arms tightened around her, and he was kissing her back with 8 years of longing and 3 months of growing feelings and 1 day of thinking he'd lost everything that mattered. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, William rested his forehead against hers, that gesture that had become theirs, wolf to girl, man to woman. "I love you," he said quietly. "I've been trying not to say it, trying not to complicate things, but I love you, Hazel. I think I've loved you since you were 10 years old, and offering stale bread to a dying wolf with more courage than sense." Hazel's laugh was half sob. "I love you too. I think I've loved you since you pressed your head against my hand and let me see past the monster to the person underneath." "Not a monster," William corrected gently. "Just lost. Until you found me. And you found me," Hazel whispered. "When I was invisible and unwanted and convinced I didn't matter, you saw me. Made me matter." "You always mattered," William said fiercely. "You just needed someone who could see it." They stood like that for a long time, holding each other in the healing garden while the sun set and stars emerged overhead. Around them, the last of the corrupted roses transformed back to living red, and the fountain's water ran clear and bright. The debt was paid, the curse was broken, and two souls who had saved each other were finally truly free. Chapter 10. The Alpha's Queen. 1 year later, autumn returned to Thornwick, but this time it brought celebration instead of fear. The wild garden blazed with red roses in full bloom, their petals catching the golden afternoon light. Lanterns hung from the ancient oaks, waiting to be lit as evening fell. White ribbons wound through the thorned vines, transforming the space from wild sanctuary to something magical, a place where civilization and nature met in perfect harmony. Hazel stood in her chambers, staring at her reflection in disbelief. The wedding dress was nothing like the borrowed blue silk she'd worn a year ago. This was forest green, deep as pine needles, rich as moss, with silver embroidery that traced patterns of wolves and roses up the bodice and sleeves. It fit perfectly because it had been made for her, designed specifically for the woman she'd become, not the invisible girl from Pinewood Hollow. Not the burden who ate food her family couldn't afford. Hazel Wise, soon-to-be Duchess of Thornwick, wife to William Gillespie, partner to the man who had once been a wolf. "You look terrified," Delia said from behind her, adjusting the silver circlet in Hazel's hair. "It's a bit late for cold feet, dear. Half the territory is waiting in that garden." "I'm not terrified of marrying him," Hazel said quickly. "I'm terrified of everything else. Being a duchess. Having responsibilities. People depending on me. What if I'm not good enough? What if I fail?" "Then you'll fail together," Delia said pragmatically. "That's what marriage is, figuring it out as you go, making mistakes, learning from them. His Grace isn't perfect either, you know. Just last week he nearly started a diplomatic incident by telling Lord Graham his hunting practices were barbaric." Despite her nerves, Hazel smiled. "That does sound like him. He speaks his mind. Consequence be damned." "And you?" Delia turned Hazel to face her properly. "You've spent a year learning statecraft, diplomacy, and territory management. You've reorganized the entire household staff for better efficiency. You've established a literacy program in 3 villages. You've done more good in 12 months than most nobles do in a lifetime." "Because William let me," Hazel said. "Encouraged me, believed I could. And you proved him right." Delia's stern expression softened into something almost motherly. "Stop doubting yourself, child. You earned this, not through bloodline or luck, but through character. The same character that made you feed a dying wolf when any sensible person would have run." A knock sounded at the door. Barry entered, looking unusually emotional. "Miss Hazel, Your Grace, it's time." "His Grace is waiting in the garden." Looking rather nervous himself, if I'm honest. Hazel took a deep breath. "All right, let's do this." The walk to the garden felt surreal. Servants lined the corridors, smiling and nodding as she passed. Some had been skeptical when William first brought her here, and nobody elevated beyond her station. But over the past year, she'd won them over through genuine kindness, hard work, and the simple fact that she treated them like people instead of furniture. The garden entrance was wreathed in flowers. Through the archway, Hazel could see the crowd, hundreds of people from across the territory. Nobles and commoners mixed together at William's insistence. Traditional wedding ceremonies separated people by rank. William had declared that tradition stupid and invited everyone. Music began, not the formal processional Hazel had expected, but something wilder. Forest sounds woven into melody, drums that echoed heartbeats, flutes that sang like wind through trees. Hazel stepped through the archway, and the crowd rose, but she barely saw them. Her eyes found William immediately, standing by the fountain in formal clothes that somehow looked uncomfortable on him, as if the Duke's regalia could never quite contain the wolf underneath. His golden eyes locked on hers, and his expression transformed. Wonder, love, gratitude, all of it written plainly across his face for everyone to see. Hazel walked toward him, past the rows of witnesses, through the garden that had been their sanctuary. With each step, she felt the last of her doubts fall away. This was right. This was home. This was where she belonged. She reached William, and he took her hands. His grip warm and solid and slightly trembling. "You're beautiful," he whispered. "You're always beautiful. But today you're God's." "Hazel, you're not so bad yourself," she whispered back, and was rewarded with his grin, the one that made him look young and carefree and completely human. The ceremony was short. William had rejected most of the traditional elements, keeping only what mattered, the vows. Father Damien Barrera, the priest from Pinewood Hollow who'd made the journey specifically for this, cleared his throat. We gather today to witness the joining of two souls. Duke William Gillespie, do you take this woman as your wife, to honor and protect, to stand beside through all of life's transformations? I do, William said clearly. His hands tightened on Hazel's. I vow to see her always, to value her always, to protect her always. As she once protected me when I was powerless, I will defend her with everything I am. As she showed me kindness, I will show her love. As she gave me freedom, I give her my heart. Freely, completely, forever. Hazel's eyes burned with tears. Hazel Wise, Father Damien continued, do you take this man as your husband, to honor and protect, to stand beside through all of life's transformations? I do, Hazel said, her voice steady despite the emotion threatening to overwhelm her. I vow to see you always, not just the Duke but the man, not just the power but the person. As you gave me home when I had none, I give you my loyalty. As you gave me purpose when I felt worthless, I give you my strength. As you gave me love, I give you mine, freely, completely, forever. William's eyes were suspiciously bright. Then, by the power vested in me, Father Damien said with a smile, I declare you husband and wife. Your Grace, you may kiss your bride. William pulled Hazel close and kissed her as if they were the only two people in the garden, as if the crowd and the ceremony and the titles didn't exist, just them. Just this moment, just the recognition of two souls who had found each other against impossible odds. The garden erupted in cheers. Lanterns blazed to life as if by magic. Music swelled, and somewhere in the deep forest beyond the fortress walls, a wolf howled, answered immediately by others, a chorus of recognition. The packs acknowledged their alpha's choice, his mate, his queen. When William and Hazel finally broke apart, both breathless and grinning, the celebration began in earnest. The feast that followed was legendary. Tables groaned under the weight of food, roasted meats, fresh bread, autumn vegetables, desserts that made even the stern Delia smile. Wine flowed freely. Musicians played everything from formal court dances to folk songs from the villages. Nobles and commoners danced together, the usual barriers of rank dissolved by William's absolute refusal to acknowledge them. This is chaos, one elderly nobleman complained to William during the festivities. Mixing ranks like this, it's unseemly. Then leave, William said pleasantly. No one's forcing you to stay. The nobleman sputtered and retreated. Beside William, Hazel bit back a laugh. You're terrible at diplomacy, she said. I'm excellent at diplomacy, William corrected. I'm just selective about who deserves it. People who treat others with respect get diplomacy. People who don't get honesty. That's not how politics works. Then politics can adapt to me. William pulled her close, his hand settling possessively at her waist. I'm the Duke. I make the rules. And my first rule as a married man is that my wife never has to pretend to be anything other than herself. Not for politics, not for appearances, not for anyone. Hazel leaned into him, feeling safe and cherished and impossibly happy. What's your second rule? That I get to dance with her at least 3 times tonight. Propriety be damned. Propriety says once is proper, twice is pushing it. 3 times, William said firmly. Minimum, possibly 4, maybe 5. I haven't decided yet. They danced until Hazel's feet ached in the formal shoes. They ate until they were both too full to move. They laughed and talked and accepted congratulations from what felt like every person in the territory. And through it all, Hazel kept touching the wolf pendant at her throat, the one William had given her a year ago, now accompanied by a wedding band of silver and gold intertwined. 2 symbols, 2 promises, protection and partnership, recognition and love. As midnight approached, William pulled Hazel aside, leading her away from the celebration toward a quieter corner of the garden. There's something I want to show you, he said, his voice slightly nervous. I was going to wait, but I can't. It's been ready for weeks and I'm terrible at keeping secrets from you. He led her to a section of the garden she hadn't explored much, the northern edge where the fortress walls met wild forest. There, hidden among ancient oaks, stood a small cottage. No, not a cottage. A house. Beautifully crafted from wood and stone, large enough for comfort but small enough to feel cozy. Climbing roses covered one wall. Windows glowed with warm light from within. "What is this?" Hazel breathed. "Our home," William said softly. "The fortress is fine for official business, for ceremonies and politics. But I wanted us to have a place that was just ours, where we could be William and Hazel, not Duke and Duchess, where we could escape when court life becomes too much." He opened the door, and Hazel stepped inside to find a space that was perfect. A main room with a fireplace and comfortable chairs. A kitchen that actually looked used, not decorative. A library filled with books on forestry and nature and fairy tales. Stairs leading to what must be a bedroom above. "The garden is right there," William said, gesturing through the back windows. "You can tend the roses, walk among the trees, have the forest close whenever you need it. And we're still on fortress grounds, still close enough to handle responsibilities. But here we can just be us." Hazel turned to him, tears streaming freely now. "It's perfect. You're perfect. This whole day has been—" "Not perfect," William interrupted gently. "I'm not perfect, Hazel. I'm still learning to be a good duke. Still learning to navigate politics without offending everyone. Still learning what it means to be worthy of you." He cupped her face, his thumbs brushing away her tears. "But I promise to keep trying, to keep growing, to keep choosing kindness and courage over convenience and tradition. Because you taught me that. You showed me what true nobility looks like." "You taught me too," Hazel said. "You showed me that I was worth protecting, worth loving, worth seeing. You gave me everything I never knew I needed." "Then we'll keep teaching each other," William said. "Keep saving each other, keep figuring out this life together." He smiled, that wolf-sharp grin she loved. "Think you can handle being married to someone who's part wild animal?" "I fed that wild animal scraps when he was dying," Hazel reminded him. "I think I can handle him." "Good." William swept her into his arms, making her laugh. "Because this wild animal is never letting you go. You're stuck with me now, Hazel Gillespie, for better or worse." "Mostly better," Hazel said, wrapping her arms around his neck. "Definitely better." He carried her up the stairs to their new bedroom, their private sanctuary within their private sanctuary. And as he kicked the door shut behind them, Hazel caught a glimpse through the window of the wild garden below, roses blooming red in the moonlight, ancient trees standing witness. The forest remembered. The wolves remembered. And in the cottage at the edge of civilization and wilderness, two souls who had saved each other built their life together. Not perfect. Not without challenges, but real. And chosen. And full of the kind of love that only comes from truly seeing someone, not their title or appearance or past, but their heart. The girl who fed wolves had become a duchess. The wolf who learned kindness had become a king worth following. And together they would protect these territories, these forests, these people, with the same courage and compassion that had saved them both. This was their story. Their triumph. Their happily ever after. Epilogue. 5 years later, in the wild garden where roses bloomed eternal and magic still whispered through the trees, a small child laughed as she chased butterflies through the undergrowth. She had her mother's dark hair and her father's golden eyes, an impossible combination that marked her as something special. Something other. "Careful, Emma," Hazel called from where she sat by the fountain, one hand resting on her rounded belly. Another child on the way. Their second miracle. William appeared from the cottage, a basket of fresh bread in his hands. "Let her run," he said, settling beside his wife. "She's got wolf blood in her veins. She needs to feel wild sometimes." "She's 3, Hazel pointed out. "Everything is wild to her." "Exactly." William handed Hazel a piece of still warm bread. "Remember when you used to bring me bread?" "In the clearing? How could I forget?" Hazel leaned against him, comfortable and content. "Best decision I ever made." "Well, second best. First best was agreeing to stay here. Third best was marrying me," William said smugly. "That was implied in the staying," Hazel teased. Little Emma ran up to them, her hands cupped carefully. "Mama," Papa, look, a beetle. She opened her hands to show them an iridescent beetle that immediately flew away. Emma's face fell into tragedy. It's okay, William said gently, pulling his daughter onto his lap. Some things need to be free. But if you're very still and very patient, another will come. The forest always shares its treasures with those who respect it. Like Mama shared bread with the wolf? Emma asked. She'd heard the story 100 times and never tired of it. Exactly like that, William confirmed. Your mama showed kindness to a creature everyone else feared, and that kindness changed everything. Emma looked at Hazel with solemn golden eyes. Will I meet a wolf someday? You might, Hazel said. And if you do, you remember, wolves are smart, loyal, protective. If you show them respect, they'll show you the same. And if I meet a cursed prince? Emma asked hopefully. William and Hazel exchanged amused glances. Then you feed him, Hazel said. And warn him of danger. And see past the curse to the person underneath. Just like any good person would. Emma nodded seriously, then wriggled off William's lap to resume her butterfly chase. She's going to be trouble, William observed. She's going to be magnificent, Hazel corrected. Strong and brave and kind. Everything good that comes from both our bloodlines. Wolf-keeper and cursed noble, William mused. Quite the combination. The best combination. Hazel took his hand, lacing their fingers together. We broke curses, changed territories, and built something real. Imagine what she'll do. In the distance, Emma's laughter rang out like bells. The roses bloomed red and full. The ancient oaks whispered their approval. And in the cottage at the edge of the wild garden, two people who had saved each other watched their daughter run free and dreamed of the future. A future built on kindness, on courage, on the simple truth that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is offer bread to a wounded wolf, because you never know who you might save, or who might save you in return. Dear viewers, as Hazel and William's journey comes to a close, I leave you with this. Have you ever shown kindness to someone when they had nothing to offer in return? Or has someone seen your worth when the world made you feel invisible? Sometimes the smallest acts of compassion create the most profound transformations, not just for others but for ourselves. If this story touched your heart, please leave a like and let me know in the comments what act of unexpected kindness changed your life.